China is not happy with Putin getting North Korean troops involved in Ukraine. But you know how they say, it takes two to tango. And it's not just Putin who agreed to this Russia-North Korea deal. The other side of this is Kim, who China is kind of an ally with. So it's not just Russia that China isn't happy with. In fact, Beijing is becoming a lot more cautious with recent actions from North Korea. Especially considering now that US has publicly put pressure on China to make sure North Korea stays in line. Now, as many people have correctly pointed out, that China wants to be the regional power in Asia. And that means it does not want a lot of chaos, especially on the Korean peninsula, which is already a big ally. South Korea is already a big ally with US, and the more North Korea picks up the rhetoric of war, the more dangerous it becomes. The more US presence is gonna be in South Korea, which kinda throws a wrench in China's plan of annexing Taiwan if it wants to in 2027. So China has been putting a little bit more pressure on North Korea to stop this war from expanding, just like how it is doing with Russia. Now, we have covered the Russian part before, so today let's go over how China is dealing with North Korea and how it's managing this war. Like always, be sure to hit the like button down below. It helps us out tremendously when covering topics like this that are not advertiser friendly on YouTube. Now, what's interesting is just 2 days ago we covered that Ukraine officially confirmed that they've had their first direct engagement with North Korean troops. Now, the interesting part here is we have had some news come out of North Korea where they came out and said, no, North Korean troops are not combatants yet. Well, this is where it's kind of a lie, because North Korean troops are helping Russians fire the North Korean missiles that are being fired inside Ukraine, that are being launched inside Ukraine. So if you're someone who is firing missiles, whether you're fighting or not, I would say you are combatant. And that's not really my thinking, that's the military thinking. And hear it yourself from Chuck Farr.
More than a score of North Korean ballistic missiles have been fired at Ukrainian cities. It was not Russian soldiers who fired those missiles. Those missile launchers did not come over with their instruction manuals translated into Russian. It was North Korean troops who fired them. Per se, there are North Korean troops in combat in Ukraine because of that. A number of North Korean officers have been killed in a targeted strike by Ukraine. This was in an area contiguous to the zero line. We know that 19 North Korean troops have already defected. They have left their places. We also know, this isn't very often reported, that Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps members are also in Ukraine. They deal with the Shahed drones, and they facilitate training. And in the early stages of the Shahed's debut, it was Iranians who are launching them. These are things definitely to keep a mind on. The very short answer to that question, are North Korean forces in occupied Ukraine, are they combatants? In my estimation, they already are. If you're shooting a missile at a Ukrainian city, you're in the fight.
Now, clearly, North Korean troops were already a combatant in this war, and their involvement has only gone up. The number of North Korean troops on the front line may vary depending on the source. Ukrainians are saying it's 12,000, South Koreans are saying it's anywhere from 12 to 18,000, and US is saying around 10,000. But every source confirms one thing, that they are there. On top of that, even Russia and North Korea have kinda given in to admitting that the troops are on the front line and are fighting for Russia. Which is a rare case, because to this day, Putin doesn't consider this a war. He still considers it a special military operation. On top of that, Putin still doesn't admit that Russia is involved in Syria. When Russia took over Crimea, it took a while for Putin to admit that those green little men were Russian soldiers. So the trend is simple, that Russia doesn't really admit to doing things that it is doing, at least not publicly. But this time around, Putin has hinted that North Korean troops are on the front lines, especially by saying basically whatever North Korea and Russia do, that's their own business. And North Korea has actually been a little bit more forward in their admission. Just recently, North Korean foreign minister visited Moscow. Here's more details on that.
Now, North Korea's foreign minister is on her way to Moscow for talks with her Russian counterpart, Sergei Lavrov. The Russian Foreign Ministry says Chu Son-hee arrived in the eastern city of Vladivostok on Tuesday before traveling to the Russian capital. Her second visit to Russia this year, seen as a mark of increased cooperation between the two countries. Now, thousands of North Korean soldiers are reported to have been deployed to Russia's border with Ukraine as part of those deepening ties.
Well, the reasons are very clear. It's ironing out details of cooperation between North Korea and Russia. In a sense, they still have a lot of details to deal with in terms of deploying North Korean soldiers to the Ukrainian soil, including, as some Russian expert Telegram channels are mentioning, the issue of language and command and control. Another thing, which is also being mentioned by Russian sources and not only Russian, is that North Korea doesn't do anything for free. So it seems like they also want to discuss what exactly Putin is going to do for North Korea. What is mentioned is actually giving Pyongyang advanced satellite technology because it wants the Pyongyang, the regime there, North Korean regime, they want to launch spy satellites, and this is not going very well for them, so probably the Russians are going to help with that. I'm certain that the North Korean minister has a bag full of things to discuss with the Russians.
From the very beginning of the special military operation, the respected comrade, chairman of state affairs of the DPRK, Kim Jong-un, has instructed that we should, without looking back at anyone, invariably and strongly support and assist the Russian army and the Russian people in their holy war. We have no doubt whatsoever that under the wise leadership of the respected president of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin, the Russian army and people will surely achieve a great victory in their holy struggle to defend the sovereign rights and security interests of their state. We, once again, assure you that until the victorious day, we will always stand firmly by our Russian comrades.
Now, that's the important part. Russia and North Korea are still ironing out the details of these troop deployments and exactly what Russia is going to give in return. And as you heard, this is what this visit is about. Now, this means that there's more to come, especially considering that North Koreans, let's say, assume there are 10,000 troops in Russia right now. If you really think about how this war is going for Russia, how the whole Russian strategy is just to send meat waves of soldiers to make sure Ukrainians run out of ammunition, 10,000 is really not that big a deal. Russia has been losing anywhere from 1,200 to 1,300 soldiers for the last month. So 10,000, let's say that lasts 9 days, that's not that many troops. But the fact that the North Korean foreign minister is visiting Russia and still ironing out the details of the deal, it could signal or it could hint at future deployments. North Korea could send a lot more troops. It's already sending boatload, millions and millions of shells to Russia, and the more troops is exactly what Russia needs, especially since Putin doesn't really want to do mobilization in Russia because that would cause headaches for him, and all these funerals that happen in Russia, that causes headache for him. So if he can get the troops from North Korea and get it for cheaper, that would be a huge headache off for him. But this does risk expanding the war. The soldiers North Korea has already sent is a big escalation, but if it continues sending more and more, no one knows where this war could go. No one knows who else can get involved, right? And that's exactly something that US wants to avoid and China wants to avoid. And that's exactly why US has publicly asked China to, I guess, put pressure on North Korea to stop this war from expanding, which China has been doing on Russia too, as we have previously covered. So let's get into US calls about China.
We have communicated with the PRC about this matter to make clear that we are concerned about it and that they ought to be concerned about this destabilizing action by two of its neighbors, Russia and North Korea. I'll let them speak for themselves, but we have been making clear to China for some time that they have an influential voice in the region, and they should be concerned about steps that Russia has taken to undermine stability.
Diplomats and military officials from the USA and South Korea are scheduled to meet in Washington in the near future. As the State Department specified, they will discuss the deployment of North Korean troops near the border with Ukraine and the expansion of relations between Moscow and Pyongyang. Earlier, a delegation from the Republic of Korea visited the NATO headquarters and informed the allies about the deployment of North Korean soldiers. According to the Western media, the alliance assumes that Seoul may reconsider its policy and start providing military support to Kyiv.
대원칙으로서 We had a principle of not directly supplying lethal weapons. We will be more flexible and can review the possibility depending on North Korean troops' activities in Russia. It is a provocation that gravely threatens the security of not only the Korean peninsula and Europe, but also the whole world.
Now, another thing that's also worrying China is the new missile test that North Korea has been carrying out in last few weeks. In fact, they have carried out 2 brand new missile tests that's basically the largest and the biggest test North Korea has ever carried out. And in fact, that's something they are publicizing very heavily to their population. And especially the most recent test that North Korea carried out, it was very public about mentioning the fact that if people just look at the projectile of the missile that they launched, it had the capability of striking anywhere inside US. That means it had the range for it, and that's the first time that has happened. So let's hear more details about that.
Well, experts we've talked to said that the launcher for this missile may be so big that it makes it hard to maneuver and very easy to pick out on satellite photos, making it easy for the U.S. to track preparations ahead of a launch, which kind of takes away from the progress North Korea has made, demonstrated by this test and the test last December with its solid fuel propellant technology. The last missile test and this missile test both demonstrated that North Korea is making strides in using solid fuel propellants, which essentially make it less detectable than if it continued to use liquid fuel propellants. What remains unclear is whether North Korea has developed a way to deliver a warhead on an intercontinental ballistic missile track. The test this week theoretically had the range to reach the U.S., but the missile was shot straight up in the air and not on the ballistic missile path that would be required if North Korea was actually in a war.
Now, the big reason China is a little bit more worried about this new development is the fact that over the last year, China has been distancing itself from North Korea. In fact, trade data suggests that food and grain-related exports from China to North Korea have dropped around 98% compared to last year. This happened while North Korea is experiencing one of the worst famines since 1990s. Well, since China wasn't there to help out North Korea, Russia swooped in and filled the void. In fact, based on recent reports, one of the things that Kim is getting in return for helping Russia so much in this war is 700,000 tons of rice every single year. That's up considerably compared to 50 to 100,000 tons that Russia was sending North Korea regularly. Now, a big way for China to be the regional power is to have all these countries, especially Russia, Iran, and North Korea, depend on it. Because at the end of the day, China's economy is multiple times bigger than all these countries' economy, and all these other countries are heavily sanctioned. So they heavily depend on China to basically live, basically survive. Now, China has always been careful about Kim's unpredictable nature. And the fact that he's becoming more and more powerful by helping Russia, he's getting all these satellite information, the satellite technology, he's getting new ICBM, the intercontinental missiles that North Korea never had, that makes him more of a wild card. As he becomes more dangerous, it becomes more unpredictable for China to predict what he might do, and China doesn't want instability in their region. And lastly, and more importantly, China also believes that the more support North Korea gets from other countries, it makes North Korea less dependent on China and thus decreasing China's influence on North Korean Kim Jong-un. Here's a little bit more detail on that.
Because anytime you have Russia and North Korea cozying up, Beijing is undoubtedly in the background, watching very, very carefully. China and North Korea have been friends, though sometimes also frenemies, since the Korean War. But as much as they are historical allies, China's government doesn't want Kim Jong-un poking the West too much. After all, a destabilized Korean peninsula isn't exactly in China's interest, and neither is an overly empowered Russia in Asia. China wants to be the center of its own region, not surrounded by unpredictable and powerful allies. Hence, while Beijing has been trying to hold back from outright condemnation, you can bet they're quietly frustrated by the potential complications this move might cause.
YouTube is still not a fan of a lot of topics we cover, and that means the videos get restricted and demonetized. That's why we recently launched memberships and Patreons. This way you guys can support the content we make directly if you're able to. Because we want to continue covering this type of topics even if advertisers don't like it. We like doing it and hopefully you guys like watching it. That's why Patreon and memberships give us a way to continue doing that without worrying about YouTube demonetizing our videos. So if you're interested and you're able to support us, you can do so by joining our Patreon or becoming a member on YouTube. The QR codes will be on the screen and the links in the description. Your support is greatly appreciated.
As Putin continues struggling in this war, he's running out of options. China, one of his only allies, is choosing to take full advantage of this desperation and get more out of him. Putin is now willing to give up Russian land to Xi Jinping just to have any hope of surviving this war. In return, it seems like China's helping Russia build more drones for the war through a secret drone project. In this video, we're going to talk about the prized piece of land that Russia's giving up to China, the assistance China's giving to Russia, and the future of China and Russia's allyship. Content like this is not always favored by the YouTube algorithm, but we're working hard to keep pushing out geopolitical videos. To help us reach our target audience, please like this video and share it with your friends and family. Now, let's get into the video. Before we go into what piece of Russian land Putin is parting with soon, let's talk about what he's getting in return from China. Drone warfare has become such an important part of the war for both sides, and Ukraine and Russia have been working to increase domestic drone production. In a meeting in St. Petersburg, Putin announced that the military was looking to increase the production of drones, emphasizing that whoever reacts faster to demands on the battlefield wins. As the war moves away from being focused on combat and airstrikes and attacks are taking over, reports show that Russia's been secretly building drones with the help of China. According to sources from a European intelligence agency, Russia established a weapons program in China to develop long-range attack drones for use in the war against Ukraine. The Russian company in charge of the program is IEMZ Kupol, which is a subsidiary of an arms company called Almaz Anti that is known for assisting the state. The drone model that Russia is looking to mass produce is called the Garpia 3, or G3, and it's been developed in China. This long-range drone travels 1,200 miles or 2,000 kilometers and can carry warheads of about 110 pounds. The G3 is an enhanced version of the Garpia A1, and Chinese experts have worked to redesign the G3 using the Garpia A1's blueprints. The Russian company Kupol was placed under sanctions in 2023, but China has still been assisting in developing drones for Russia using its own specialists. The drones are manufactured in China and then given to Kupol for testing. In an update to the government, Kupol told the Defense Ministry that they were mass-producing the G3 drones and other drones at a factory in China, and soon they would be able to deploy them for a special military operation in Ukraine. Some undated invoices that were discovered show that 7 war drones, including 2 G3s, were sent to Kupol this summer by a Russian company working as an intermediary for an unnamed supplier in China. Sources also show that another Russian defense company known as TSK Vector has been working as an intermediary between Kupol and a Chinese company named Redl plus TSK Vector Industrial to facilitate drone production. A separate document also shows that the 3 companies are working together to set up a project in China's Xinjiang province in an economic district known as Kashgar. Understanding the implications of this report, the Chinese Foreign Ministry immediately responded and said that it was unaware of any secret drone project and that it had close eyes on the exports of drones from its country. However, a lack of administration by the Foreign Ministry does not mean that it's not happening. It's no secret that civilian drones that have been manufactured by Chinese drone maker DJI are used by Russian forces, even though DJI has said that it actively denounces the use of its products in combat. This means that it's not enough for China to just condemn Russia's conduct without actively stopping it. Kupol and the Russian Defense Ministry are playing the silent game and did not respond to the allegations. Fabian Hinz, a research fellow at the International Institute for Strategic Studies, explained that if the reports were true, this would have significant consequences for China. Currently, China has only delivered dual-use goods that have been used for both general and military purposes. A secret drone system would be a very bold indication that it is for the war in Ukraine. In response to the report, the White House National Security Council stated that it's worried and interpreted China's actions as providing lethal assistance to a US-sanctioned Russian firm. Now we turn to Putin's trade for Russian land. Up until this point, China's been very strategic about how it helps Russia, attempting to be subtle and not come across as an aggressor. Throughout the war, China has not been a risk-taker, and when the US threatened sanctions if China kept assisting Russian businesses, Chinese banks were quick to cut transactions with Russia. Now, assisting in producing drones for the Ukrainian war is a sure way for China to be shunned by the international community and risk more sanctions. This means that whatever China is getting is definitely worth the trouble. This type of exchange is very unusual for Putin, whose entire reign has been built on amassing more territory for Russia. So we know that giving territory away is a sure sign of desperation. With most of the international community teaming up to ensure his downfall, Russia has very few options for survival. One of these options is China, which has been instrumental in keeping Moscow afloat in this time of sanctions. In the last quarter of 2023, China supplied 70% of Russia's imports of machine tools used for ballistic missile production. Throughout 2023, 90% of Russia's microelectronic imports also came from China. This equipment has been very important in Russia's war effort. In order to keep receiving assistance from China, Russia is going to give something up in return. The territory that China will potentially be receiving from this trade is the Tumen River. The river begins in Northeast Asia, between China and North Korea, and then goes into Russia. It's 324 miles long, and its basin size is 13,050 square miles. It starts at Mount Paektu, which is on the border between China and North Korea. The river then flows down through Russia until it reaches the Sea of Japan. About 30% of the river forms part of the North Korea-China border. 40% is the China-Russia border, and 30% forms part of the North Korea-Russia border. Although large parts of the river flow through all three countries, the distribution of access is not even. About 65% of the river flows through China, through the Jilin and Liaoning provinces. But China has the least amount of access. In the beginning, the river was Chinese territory during the Qing dynasty. Then came the Opium Wars between China and Western powers that ended very badly for the Qing Empire. Russia decided to take advantage of the weakening empire and signed the Treaty of Aigun with China, which saw Beijing losing a large number of territories. One of the terms was that the Qing Empire had to cede the Tumen River to the Russian Empire. Relations between the two nations were sour, but in 1991, Russia and China signed the Sino-Soviet Agreement that clarified the borders of the Tumen River. Article 9 of the agreement states, "The Soviet side and its related side agree that Chinese vessels carrying the Chinese flag can navigate back and forth along the Tumenjiang, or the Tumenaya River, which is described after the 33rd boundary point narrated in Article 2 of this agreement. This specific issue related to sailing shall be resolved by consultation from both parties." The agreement was welcomed by both nations, but China had some issues with it. One of the issues that China had was that the riverbed was shallow, so large ships couldn't really sail through. China's desire was that there would be some infrastructural development to help with its access issues. China wanted to step in and widen the river so it could get bigger vessels through. China's Coast Guard ships are really a sight to behold and are no match for the Tumen River in its current state. To give you a mental picture, China's CCG-5901 is the world's largest Coast Guard ship, and it's 8 times the size of an average US Coast Guard ship. The problem for China is that the agreement limited its involvement to just access. There was no incentive on either North Korea's or Russia's part to help China out. The current arrangement is also inconvenient for China because it has to sail all the way around the Korean peninsula to get to the Sea of Japan and its trading ports there. Now, it's very ironic to see that over 160 years later, China is using Russia's weakness to get the territory back. This incident proves that things are never ever forgiven and forgotten in politics, and most nations are just waiting for the opportunity to get their revenge. In the early parts of 2024, China was looking to negotiate with both North Korea and Russia for more access to the river. There had been a boost in China's commercial activity in the area, and China wanted to be able to use the river to link with the Sea of Japan. China would benefit because 3 of its eastern Chinese provinces would have a shorter route to Japan, North Korea's eastern ports, and the United States. This would reduce sailing time and cut costs significantly. Wang Wen, the executive dean for the Chongyang Institute for Financial Studies at Renmin University of China, explained that allowing larger vessels to navigate through would facilitate the cheaper transporting of Chinese supplies, which would enhance its trade with countries like Japan and South Korea. In May 2024, Putin visited his friend Xi in China for a summit in Beijing, and talks about the river began. The meeting was in celebration of 75 years of diplomatic relations between the two, and they released a joint statement showing that the two of them spoke at length about long-term plans for cooperation between the two. In relation to the border discussion, the statement read, "The two sides will conduct constructive dialogue with the Democratic People's Republic of Korea on the matter of Chinese vessels navigating to the sea via the lower reaches of the Tumen River." This statement shows that Russia's ready to bend to China's requests, but Putin just needs to get North Korea on board as well. Things have been looking up for China, because in June, both Russia and North Korea agreed to allow Chinese vessels to travel on the final 9.3 miles or 15-kilometer stretch of the river, which was currently blocked by a bridge and required permissions from Russia and North Korea. The only thing that's currently standing in China's way is North Korea. The truth is that North Korea doesn't really benefit from China being able to access the river. Because China wanted to be able to use the river, it had to develop the North Korean port of Rasin to be able to use it as an outlet to ship its trade out to the world. Kim Jong-un benefits from the current arrangement because all of China's goods have to pass through the port, and that's revenue for the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. In June 2024, Putin also paid a visit to North Korea for discussions, where the two leaders agreed to build another road bridge connecting Russia and North Korea over the Tumen River. There's already a bridge between the two named the Korea-Russia Friendship Bridge, but it seems like that wasn't enough. This special bridge was opened in 1959, and it's been a sign of the cooperation between North Korea and Russia since then. Through the bridge, trade between the two nations is facilitated, and it's also a symbol of the cultural ties between the two nations. While North Korea may be looking to drag its feet about the agreement, Putin doesn't really have much to lose. The area of Russian territory on the Tumen River is not utilized often, and all there is in the area is a rundown border post village. With the way things are looking for Putin, if he can't get North Korea on board, he may just have to cede his area to China alone. Under this transaction, both nations will benefit in the end. It might be difficult to understand why Russia's so dependent on China's drones if you don't know what Russia's arsenal is currently looking like. Recently, we crossed 1 million subscribers. Ever since then, we've been flooded with emails asking us questions and advice about growing a channel on YouTube. Even though we try our best to reply to every single email, sometimes these take up too much time or they ask the same question we've answered before. That's why we've decided to put all of our YouTube advice into one email bootcamp for completely free. So if you're someone who's interested in starting your own YouTube channel, you can get your email bootcamp by clicking the link in the description or scanning the QR code on the screen. Now, back to the video. As the battle's gone on and Ukraine has succeeded in its attacks on Russian artillery, the Kremlin's resorted to relying on outdated equipment and bringing some pieces from the archives. One of the outdated machines that's made a reappearance on the battlefield is the T-55 tank. Satellite images that circulated on social media show that Russia's taken out a dozen of these tanks from a base in Arsenyev. These specific tanks were first commissioned in 1948 by the Soviet Union's Red Army. According to John Delaney, a senior curator at the Imperial War Museum, they've been sitting there for a decade or more. They'll need a considerable amount of work to get them back into good running order. We need to also understand that even if Russia wanted to produce weaponry that could rival those made by its competitors, the brain drain affecting the country wouldn't allow it. When the war started out in 2022, many people began to flee. According to estimates, up to 1 million out of some 144 million Russians left the country in 2022 and 2023, in what's been the largest brain drain since the collapse of the Soviet Union. This number includes young and able-bodied individuals who would have been integral to the design and manufacturing of military equipment for the Russian army. Because of this, Russia has had to turn to China to fill the gaping void. Now we turn to discuss how bad things have gotten for Putin. His desperation is worrying, and we need to get to the bottom of how dire things are for the Kremlin to understand this trade of land. It's well known that Putin entered the war with Ukraine cockily, with the expectation that it would be over in 3 weeks. 2.5 years later, Putin is still fighting a war and stretching his resources thin on all ends. The surprise invasion of Kursk in August by Ukraine was a significant turning point in the war. From then on, Russia has been experiencing attack after attack. Let's first talk about Ukraine's recent successes in the war. The recent drone attacks in Ukraine have been bringing the war into Russian territories, and Putin doesn't know what to do about it. Yuri Ihnat, a spokesman for Ukraine's Air Force, commented on the latest drone attacks, saying, "There's always something flying in Russia, as well as in Moscow. Now the war's affecting those who weren't concerned. No matter how the Russian authorities would like to turn a blind eye on this by saying that they've intercepted everything, something does hit." In early September, 140 Ukrainian drones were launched for a targeted attack that hit multiple Russian regions overnight. In the town of Ramenskoye, which is not far from Moscow, 1 woman died and 8 people were reportedly injured. The drone attack started explosive fires that took out 2 multi-story residential buildings in the Moscow region. After the first couple of hits, about 5 residential buildings had to be evacuated. For the first time, Russian authorities were forced into action, and Vnukovo, Domodedovo, and Zhukovsky airports were shut down for fear that the drones might target the biggest airports in Russia. This attack really embarrassed Putin, who'd been trying very hard to pretend that everything's under control. On September 1st, Ukraine launched another drone attack, which hit a refinery and power station inside Russia. The drones also targeted some oil reservoirs in the Rostov region, causing extensive damage. Throughout September, Ukraine has been launching attack after attack without giving Russia a moment to breathe. Another fatal drone attack hit a Russian missile facility using large Ukrainian drones. The attack took out a large portion of Russia's arsenal as the facility was being used to store missiles and other explosives. In response to these attacks, Ukraine has said that it has wiped off the face of the earth a large warehouse of the main missile and artillery department. Ukraine has been very strategic in its drone attacks and has stuck to attacking important infrastructure like airfields, military bases, and oil refineries. Last week, a Ukrainian missile strike targeted a headquarters of Russia's Black Sea Fleet in Crimea. The footage shows smoke over the building in Sevastopol. This is not the first time that Ukraine's attacked Crimea, and many of its drone attacks are known to take out Russian vessels that are docked at the port in Sevastopol. In another attack, Ukrainian forces struck 15 air defense systems in Crimea, taking out several S-300, S-350, and S-400 air defense systems. Ukraine also hit 15 radar stations and over 10 control centers stationed in the Russian-occupied peninsula using the Ukrainian kamikaze drones. In places like Belgorod, Voronezh, and Lipetsk, Ukraine has purposefully hit military bases and other sites as well. The reason why Ukraine intentionally hits these locations is because they're responsible for fueling Russia's war machine. Ukraine understands that it needs to stretch its limited resources far, and it's a strategy like this that it's kept it ahead of Russia. Putin has been left reeling by such attacks as the cost of replenishing his stock is high and the nation's coffers are empty. Putin is desperate for China's help because he can't afford to carry on fighting the war. He hopes that with the new drone supply, he can land more definitive blows that will end the war in his favor. He can no longer justify the rising death toll, which, according to Business Insider, is 1,000 soldiers a day. On September 17, 2024, the UK Ministry of Defence and Defence Intelligence estimated that Russia had suffered over 610,000 casualties. Putin is in a sticky situation because he's gone too far in the war, and now he's trying to cut his losses. An extensive report by the General Staff listed all of Russia's losses since 2022. So far, Russia has lost 554,510 troops, 8,180 tanks, 15,715 armored fighting vehicles, 20,269 vehicles and fuel tanks, 15,051 artillery systems, 1,115 multiple launch rocket systems, 883 air defense systems, 361 airplanes, 326 helicopters, 11,973 drones, 28 ships and boats, and 1 submarine. At the rate that Russia's losing artillery, it needs China's help to continue to resupply its army. One of the many things that Russia's also underestimated was the support that Ukraine was going to get from its allies. This has also led Putin to this point of desperation. Every week, there are announcements about a new world power pouring money into Ukraine's military fund. Recently, Sweden donated its 16th military aid package valued at around $2.14 billion. This donation included F-16 fighter jets and an airborne surveillance and control aircraft, or ASC-890, to help Ukraine fight against Russia's monopoly in the sky. Then, again this month, an Australian company called Electro-Optic Systems transferred 160 Slinger anti-drone systems to assist the Ukrainian military. In August, Downing Street gave Ukraine the go-ahead to use British weapons for operations on Russian territory, and reports have shown that it uses British Challenger 2 tanks inside Russia. Against all of this support, the odds aren't looking good for Putin. This has forced him to rely on China's assistance, and this help has come at the price of some land. While external pressures can be taxing, we can't underestimate the power of domestic disapproval. If Putin doesn't secure a win soon, he's going to be leaving the Kremlin. The disapproval of Putin is so wide-reaching, and for once, despite class and differences, the majority of Russia can agree that a losing war is being fought. The first group that's pushing Putin to the point of desperation is the army. This is not good, because these are the people on the ground fighting the war effort. Soldiers are turning against Putin, and most of them have complained about lacking motivation to fight. Unfortunately, Putin's choice of military leadership has placed him in an awkward position. The top brass has mismanaged military funds, and this has led to shortages in equipment and resources. Many of the soldiers have told horrifying stories of being forced to the front line without having helmets or flak jackets. The number of desertions has also risen over the past couple of months. In June 2024, Media Zona reported that more than 10,000 Russian fighters have been accused of refusing to serve in the war since its start in 2022. Of these 10,000, 339 have been accused of desertion. According to Ukraine's GUR military agency, more than 18,000 Russian soldiers had deserted, and almost 12,000 of these fighters were part of the army that was fighting extensively in eastern Ukraine. Losing the support of his military at such a crucial time has pushed Putin into looking for alternative forms of warfare, and the special drone project is his last hope of survival. Another group of people who aren't happy with Putin are his powerful allies and friends. His ascension into power was backed by many powerful businessmen and militia leaders who believed that they could benefit from his reign. However, as they watch Russia struggling in the war against Ukraine, they've changed their minds. In 2023, there was Prigozhin's revolt against Putin. But this year, another brave militia leader stood up against Putin. George Zakrevsky, the leader of the Paladin Military Union, has asked Russian soldiers to come together to overthrow the government and condemn Putin's leadership. In a message to Telegram, Zakrevsky called on the Russian soldiers to join his noble movement and union and ditch Putin, declaring, "Our country's already in deep trouble. Drones fly over central Russia, even reaching Moscow and St. Petersburg. Our Black Sea Fleet is being decimated as if we were a third-rate nation. This so-called president, the Great Putin, has led us into this disaster." Another important group of people who are no longer behind Russia are the oligarchs. In the beginning, they used their money and their influence to fund Putin's endeavors. But as Russia continues to be bled dry, they can't stand by him any longer. Billionaire Oleg Tinkov, who founded Russia's Tinkoff Bank in 2006, is one of the Russian oligarchs who have completely bashed the war. Like most wealthy people in Russia, he's been subject to sanctions, and so the war doesn't have his support. In a post to Instagram, he wrote, "I don't see a single beneficiary of this insane war. Innocent people and soldiers are dying." In turning to China for help, Russia's trying to save what's left of the war effort. The only way that he'll be able to get everything back on track is if he can somehow secure some wins in the war again. Some advances in the war will win him back the support of his allies and the Russian people, too. The state of the Russian economy currently has left Putin scrambling for solutions, even from unlikely places. According to the US Treasury, the war and the accompanying sanctions have cut 5% of Russia's economic growth. Russia's GDP has also dropped by 2.1%, with the government's revenue plunging by 35%. And at the end of 2023, there was a budget deficit of about $23.3 billion. The cost of basic goods in the country has risen by 25%, and banks are failing to maintain interest rates. To make matters worse, Russia can no longer rely on China for foreign currency after the US threatened to place secondary sanctions on China for assisting Russia. The downward spiral of the economy and the accumulative effect of the sanctions have left Putin in a tight spot as he continues to pursue his war effort. The problem is that Putin is not one to give up, so the secret drone project is his solution to the problem. If he can't get his army and allies to stand behind him, he's turning to the next best thing. Putin has very few options left, and China is currently his saving grace. The trade is also not as difficult for him because he has no territorial ambitions around the Tumen River. With this secret drone project, Russia hopes to be able to launch more offensives in Ukraine and take back the control it had in the beginning. China is very opportunistic too, and sees Russia's desperation as an opportunity to rewrite some wrongs. Unfortunately for Putin, he's out of options, so he'll have to trade land with China to gain land from Ukraine.
North Korea's population is about to collapse, and this threat is getting serious with every passing day. You may think we're kidding, but take a look at this video of its leader, Kim Jong-un, crying in front of his citizens, begging them to fight for their inevitable future. Aren't you a little bit surprised to see someone who is notoriously known for leading one of the world's most oppressive regimes crying in fear? And a little more curious to know about why this population collapse is happening? To answer the question of what forced the Hermit Kingdom leader to cry, simply put, he was urging all North Korean women to have more children to stop the fall in the birth rate, an issue that has long troubled the country from as early as the 1970s and one day could very well lead to a population collapse. While North Korea's population decline is not a new development, as numerous headlines have highlighted over the years, this marked the first time its leader publicly acknowledged it as a problem. But why is North Korea's population declining? And why is Kim Jong-un so riled up about it? After all, one look at the total population graph of the country, one can easily say that all the North Korean population over the years has only gone up. So how come there's a threat of population decline in the country? We will be covering all this shortly, but before we dig into the what and why, let's take a quick look at the current scenario. And before we get into the main subject, please hit the like button to help us stay in the algorithm. YouTube does not like hard-hitting content, and your likes mean a lot to us in our continued effort to create and deliver such geopolitical topics. All right, let's get on with the video. While there are several parameters available, the single most important factor in determining population growth is something known as the total fertility rate, or the TFR. The total fertility rate measures the average number of children born to women during their reproductive years. Or, in much simpler terms, it is the number of children each woman will give birth to on average. Currently, North Korea's fertility rate stands at 1.79 births per woman. And as per the observers, this number will only go down in the future. This is a big problem for the country, as it is lower than the birth rate needed to maintain the population. You see, according to the United Nations assessment, the ideal total fertility rate required for any country to maintain its population from decline or any collapse in the future is 2.1 births per woman. This is also called the replacement level fertility, which, as the name suggests, is the level of fertility at which a population exactly replaces itself from one generation to the next. And that's exactly what worries Kim Jong-un, because if this trend of continued decline in fertility rates continues, this could create a huge crisis for the country in the long run. This means that not only North Korea's working age population, that is, the number of people between the ages of 15 and 64, could start to fall in the years leading to 2030, but the country's overall population of 26 million people could also begin to decline from 2034. This issue of growing demographics crisis isn't just North Korea's. Several East Asian countries like China, Taiwan, South Korea, and Japan are also facing similar population challenges, though for different reasons. China, for example, had a 2-year consecutive population drop in both 2022 and 2023 due to low birth rates, which is currently sitting at 1.7 births per woman. Due to this, it may lose up to 109 million by 2050, or more alarmingly, its population could shrink by half by the year 2100. Similarly, Japan's fertility rate is 1.2 births per woman, the lowest ever recorded, making the 8th consecutive year of decline. And speaking of decline, how can we forget South Korea with a birth rate of 0.68? To put it into perspective, the condition of the South Korean population decline is so terrifying that its population of 51 million people could halve by the year 2100. Now, when we compare North Korea with a birth rate of 1.7 from these countries, you could say that the situation in North Korea isn't that different, and it even has a higher birth rate than some of them. So why is this threat of population collapse more alarming in North Korea than its neighbors? For that, you need to understand that there's a key difference between the country and its neighbors, as countries like China, Japan, or South Korea, for that matter, are all developed, wealthy, and have stronger economies. These are upper middle income and high income countries, while North Korea is a low income country, and that comes with certain consequences. Let's understand what those consequences are and how North Korea is a bit of a paradox in terms of the falling birth rate. In general, developed countries with high income tend to have a lower fertility rate due to lifestyle choices associated with economic affluence, where mortality rates are low, birth control is easily accessible, and children often can become an economic hardship caused by housing, education costs, and other costs involved in bringing up a child. To cite a few examples, the United States has a fertility rate of 1.7. Russia has 1.4, and the United Kingdom with 1.7, and the list goes on. However, such is not the case with low-income countries, and they typically face a higher fertility rate. Take Sub-Saharan Africa, for example, which is one of the poorest regions in the world and has a fertility rate of 5 births per woman. Now, in 2023, North Korea's gross national income per capita was just about $1,217, making it one of the poorest countries. And yet, unlike any other poor country, it is facing a declining fertility rate seen only in developed countries. And that's where the real threat lies. Besides wealth, the developed countries also have modernized economies and often compensate for the declining workforce with technological advances and automation. Strikingly opposite, North Korea still uses a labor-intensive economic model, meaning its economy relies heavily on people and physical labor rather than technology or automation. Without technological advancements, North Korea cannot balance the shrinking labor force with machines or efficient processes like any developed country would. With little fuel, machinery, or advanced technology, Kim needs a booming population to support the labor-intensive farm and industrial sectors and fill the ranks of one of the world's most militarized states. So, a declining fertility rate and a shrinking working-age population means fewer people will be available to support the economy, leading to potential challenges in maintaining productivity and economic growth. In other words, North Korea is growing old before getting rich. But why is this happening? While the reasons behind this are many, let's start by going back a few decades into the country's history and see how it is responsible for the current population collapse threat. Before the Korean Peninsula was divided, it was under Japanese rule from 1910 to 1945. And during the 1940s, the total population of the peninsula was around 25 million. However, after the defeat of the Japanese and in the aftermath of the Second World War, in 1945, the Korean Peninsula was divided into 2 parts. The North was administered by the Soviet Union, and the United States administered the South. North Korea, backed up by the Soviet Union and later China, was a communist state, while South Korea, supported by the United States and other Western allies, was anti-communist and capitalist. Long story short, due to growing tension between the two factions and North Korean leader Kim Il-sung's desire to unify Korea under communist rule by force, a civil war started in the Korean Peninsula in June of 1950, when the Northern forces, equipped and supported by the Soviet Union, launched a surprise invasion of South Korea. The war went on for 3 brutal years and resulted in a significant loss of life, with millions of casualties resulting in changing the demographics of both sides. Now, coming back to North Korea, its population was estimated at 9.3 million at the time of its division in 1945. The country saw almost no population gain through migration across borders from 1945 to 1949, but then lost more than 1 million people during the 1950s Civil War, due to heavy casualties and a large refugee migration to South Korea. However, after the Korean War, the country saw a major surge in population because of the peace and massive post-war rehabilitation period, and the population exponentially rose from 8.4 million in 1953 to 15 million by the 1970s, showing a growth of about 3% per year. However, there was also one major factor that hugely contributed to this growth, and that was the boost in the country's economy. While the country lay in rubble in the aftermath of the 3-year gruesome war, something had to be done to jumpstart the collapsed economy. Influenced by both the Soviet Union and China, who were the key allies of North Korea at the time, Kim Il-sung adopted a similar command or centrally planned economy to achieve rapid economic recovery and development. Under the command economy, which still exists in North Korea to this day, the state controls all means of production, and the government sets priorities and emphasizes in economic development. In other words, the government decides what goods and services to produce, how much to produce, and how to distribute them. hence giving them complete control of the mobilization of resources. Under this policy, they also started to implement a series of economic plans with the primary goal of rebuilding the country's economy, infrastructure, and industrial capacity, which had been severely damaged during the war. These plans were modeled after Soviet-style economic strategies, focusing heavily on heavy industry, agriculture, and energy production. To successfully execute them, the Soviets provided substantial financial aid, technological assistance, and specialists to North Korea. On the other hand, China saw the country as a crucial buffer zone to separate China from South Korea and Japan, who were part of the American sphere of influence. But more importantly, both the Soviets and the Chinese wanted to prevent capitalism from spreading further to the Far East at all costs. Therefore, following the classic rule of the enemy of my enemy, China too helped with the required funds and political support. So, with significant assistance from both its allies, in 1954 the government made an ambitious effort by introducing its first three-year plan. The plan prioritized rebuilding and expanding heavy industries, such as steel, machinery, mining, and chemicals. A significant portion of resources were also allocated to build new industrial facilities and restore damaged factories along with other infrastructure, including railways, roads, bridges, and communication systems to restore basic economic functions. Other key areas like agriculture and energy were also targeted to achieve food self-sufficiency and support industrial growth. By the end of 1956, the collective effort bore results, and the first three-year plan was considered widely successful in North Korea, as it led to the partial recovery of the country's industrial and agricultural sectors. The North Korean government claimed that they not only achieved but also surpassed many of their targets, setting the stage for subsequent economic plans like the 5-year plan in 1957 and the 7-year plan in 1961, which further expanded industrial and agricultural production. Thanks to this relatively strong economy that provided economic stability and adequate state welfare support for families at the time, the fertility rate hit an all-time high at almost 4 births per woman in 1970, which was the highest ever recorded in North Korea's history. But then, on the economic front, things began to change in the late 1970s. North Korean economic development up until the 70s was notable for its fast rate of industrialization. So, to further fund its industrialization projects and modernization efforts, North Korea had borrowed heavily from Western countries and Japan. These loans were primarily used for purchasing technology and equipment. However, as global interest rates rose and North Korea's exports failed to generate enough revenue, the country struggled to repay its debts, and by the late 1970s, North Korea faced a debt crisis, which severely impacted its economy. Moreover, due to its obsession with industrial development, its agricultural sector also faced chronic underinvestment and inefficiencies, causing low agricultural output, and the problem of food shortages began to surface. It was also during this time that its relations with its main allies, the Soviet Union and China, became a bit strained due to political and ideological differences. Although both countries continued to provide some support, the level of aid and economic assistance declined, further straining North Korea's economy. Coping with the issue of a slowing economy, the government began to encourage only 1 or 2 children per couple. And to boost this policy, birth control and abortions were made widely available to its citizens. This policy bore results, but perhaps not the results the government had expected. From a fertility rate of 2.8 in 1980, North Korea saw an exceptional decline to 1.9 in 2000. And as a result, within 20 years, they had to ban abortions and the distribution of contraceptives. Pretty similar to what happened with China's one-child policy, the government started to encourage more births in the country and also started to offer subsidies and other benefits to families with 3 or more children. Apart from the governmental policies, there was also one huge factor responsible for the declining birth rate in the 1990s. After the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, North Korea not only lost its remaining closest ally, but this also led to a severe economic crisis in the country, as it lost its primary trading partner and a source of aid. Its economy, which was heavily reliant on state-controlled agriculture, was already insufficient and under strain at the time, and the Soviet collapse came as a major blow, because suddenly North Korea had no supply of fuel or fertilizers essential for agriculture. The inevitable happened, and from 1994 to 1998, the country experienced one of the worst famines in human history. Also known as the Arduous March, the 1994 North Korean famine was a severe humanitarian crisis that resulted in significant population decline due to malnutrition and mass starvation. Estimates suggest that the country lost about 12% of its total population, and nearly 3 million people died because of it. This period also marked the first time North Korea's fertility rate dropped below the ideal fertility rate. And to be honest, there has been little to no improvement after that. A flying theory behind this is that perhaps the people born during the famine or just after the famine are less inclined to have children because of the severe burden that comes with it. After all, raising and providing for children is not exactly an easy task when your country is plagued by food shortages, right? While this may be true, there does exist one significant impact of the 1990s famine that is one of the biggest driving factors behind North Korea's rate of fertility declining today. During the extreme food crisis in the 1990s and the famine that followed, North Korea also underwent one radical change in terms of the role of women in its society. More and more Korean women were observed seeking survival through unofficial economic activities amid growing marketization to support their families in place of men who were forced into unpaid labor by the government. When the government welfare system collapsed, women became the sole breadwinner of the family, and naturally having a child meant that they couldn't work and the whole family had to starve. Gradually, as North Korean women adjusted to the double burden of traditional roles and the new job of breadwinner, so did social norms about marriage and family. Fast forward to 25 years later, this particular change can still be seen in the country even after it has partially recovered from the crisis. According to defectors and reports from inside North Korea, young people, particularly women, now delay marriage and prioritize access to wealth rather than to power when looking for a spouse. Like many countries worldwide, North Korea is also experiencing a cultural shift, where younger generations, including women, prioritize careers or personal goals over starting a family, especially given the economic hardships of the country. If you think about it, it does make sense. In a society where the quality of life is low and women are responsible for both earning money and raising children, this growing trend of staying away from marriage or avoiding children reflects nothing but a pragmatic and rational decision made by young North Korean women. But sadly, Kim Jong-un's government believes that the women in the country are targets of ideological reforms. And these anti-marriage and anti-childbirth views are nothing but a corrupt influence of Western capitalist lifestyle. As per their words, in this era, the greatest way for women to serve the party and nation is to marry and have lots of children. However, many unmarried women remain unconvinced and suggest that the childbearing issue will resolve itself if the conditions for raising children improve. When asked by one of the defectors about the government's statement, she argued against it, saying it is ridiculous to blame ideology instead of other factors when women, who face a constant threat of food shortage, don't have basics like washing machines, vacuums, or even hot water, are put solely in charge of childcare on top of having to earn money. Well, there's certainly some truth to that, as North Korea's economic hardship is hardly a secret. We all know that the country has been a poster child for borderline starvation and food crises practically from the time of its creation. It has faced chronic food shortages for decades, which worsen during periods of natural disasters like floods and droughts, and continue to impact agricultural output, leading to recurring food shortages. Malnutrition is yet another common phenomenon in the country and has caused several health issues and higher mortality rates, particularly among children and pregnant women, reducing the overall population growth rate. Another compelling evidence of malnutrition can be seen from the continuous shrinking of the height and weight of children since the 1980s. The headline reads that almost half of North Korea's population is undernourished. According to a study, 1 of every 5 North Korean children suffers from malnutrition. And with the poor quality of the healthcare system available, the situation's really only getting worse. As a socialist state, North Korea, under its constitution, guarantees free healthcare for all. However, the country's provision of medical care faces many challenges due to the lack of resources and international sanctions. Not only is the healthcare system underdeveloped, but it also lacks basic medical supplies, facilities, and trained professionals. As per reports, many citizens do not have access to adequate healthcare, which leads to high mortality rates from malnutrition and other preventable diseases. Furthermore, sanctions imposed by the UN and other countries in response to North Korea's nuclear and missile programs have also deepened the economic crisis. Limited access to international markets and aid has had severe consequences for the country's food supply and healthcare system, further increasing mortality and reducing fertility. North Korea also has a long-standing housing shortage, with some studies suggesting that the country only has enough homes to accommodate about 70 to 80% of its households. Another reason contributing to population decline is North Korea's continued practice of Jong-un, or military-first policy. Given its past history and current hostility, the government has long prioritized military spending over the welfare of its citizens. And this diversion of resources leaves less investment in healthcare, education, and social services that could otherwise support population growth. The regime's authoritarian rule and harsh punishment for dissent have created an atmosphere of fear and control, making people less motivated to bring children into such a hostile environment. While on the topic of a hostile environment, defection is also yet another factor that can exacerbate the population decline process in North Korea. Over the years, many North Koreans have tried to escape the country due to political repression, economic deprivation, or the hope of a better life elsewhere, mainly in South Korea or China. Although the numbers did significantly decrease during the COVID-19 pandemic as the government tightened border security and severe penalties for those who tried to leave the country, some still managed to escape. Earlier this year, South Korea reported that the number of North Korean defectors nearly tripled in 2023. This continuous outflow of people, especially those of working age and in their prime reproductive years, does impact population growth. Additionally, many defectors are young and skilled, which also leads to something called a brain drain effect in the country. And these individuals take their expertise and skills with them, depriving their home country of valuable human capital. Likewise, immigration or permanent settlement by foreigners is also almost unheard of. North Korea is one of the most radically homogenous nations on Earth, with 99.8% of its population identifying as ethnically Korean, and mixing of blood is generally not something the government approves of. The North Korean government tightens controls on who enters and exits the country, and it heavily monitors all foreign visitors. The government views any prolonged foreign presence as a potential source of espionage or ideological influence that could undermine its control and views it as a threat to its stability. So, using immigration as a tool to slow down its population decline is certainly out of the question for this most isolated country in the world. But there are a few things North Korea is actively pursuing to slow down its looming demographic crisis. So far, the country has implemented a pro-natalist policy to encourage higher birth rates among its citizens, and the state media often highlights the benefits of having multiple children, portraying it as a way to strengthen the country. The government promotes large families as a patriotic duty and tries to award multi-child families with several incentives and other benefits. Such benefits include additional rations, childcare services, or other state-supported benefits, though the effectiveness of these incentives is limited due to economic hardship and food shortages. Multi-child families are also provided with school supplies on major anniversaries, while parents of triplets and quadruplets are given food and medicine for free and are allocated homes on a preferential basis. Since 2007, mothers who gave birth to a second child are also said to be provided with additional food for 6 months. Under its fertility promotion policies, pregnant women too receive extra benefits. To promote childbirth, the country has extended its maternity leave up to 240 days, including 60 days before and 180 days after childbirth. The government mandates that pregnant women receive a free medical checkup once a month and once a week when their childbirth is approaching. During this period, mothers receive prenatal and postnatal subsidies equivalent to 3,000 North Korean won. However, if you research deeper, the subsidies of 3,000 won, or $3.33 US, are meaningless, because with the money they can't even buy 2 pounds of rice, which is priced at roughly 6,000 won in the market. Shocking, right? Anyway, while these measures can be seen as positive steps taken by the government, it's important to acknowledge that, given North Korea's track record, there are likely some bad ones too. While abortions have been banned in the country since 1993, and punishments for those who perform illegal abortions and use contraceptive devices were already in place, in October of 2015, the government issued a new directive that, along with abortion, also banned the implantation of birth control devices such as IUDs to further control the falling birth rate. Another step involves punishing doctors who carry out secret abortions. The practice has been banned in the country since 1993, and still, to boost their small government salary, some doctors have secretly installed medical equipment in their homes to perform abortions. They charge around 30,000 won, or about $33 per procedure, which is about the monthly salary of an average worker in North Korea. But those who get caught receive severe punishment and may lead to imprisonment of up to 5 to 10 years. To stop such practices, the government has increased doctor salaries by over 40 times, but many still engage in private medical work to make ends meet. Furthermore, there has been a severe crackdown on vendors, too, who sell smuggled contraceptive pills to the residents of the country, and those found guilty are party to severe punishment or jail. To further prevent population loss, the government has also intensified efforts to prevent defections. Besides tightening border security and increased surveillance, the government has also imposed severe punishment for those caught attempting to flee the country. On top of that, North Korea pressures China to return defectors caught along the border, treating them as criminals upon their return and subjecting them to imprisonment or even much harsher punishment to set an example for others considering escape. But what North Korea fails to realize is that defection, change in women's ideology, or social norms are not the root cause of its population decline. It's the economic condition of the country that is responsible for it. So as long as the government doesn't carry out major reforms to alleviate the economic burden that limits people's willingness to have a larger family, this trend of falling birth rates will go on and one day lead to a greater population collapse of the country. To no one's surprise, North Korea, being North Korea, is doing just the opposite. Rather than taking a policy-based approach to address the situation that is leading women to avoid marriage and childbirth, the government is handling the problem as an ideological issue. Where the country should embrace reforms, such as cutting inefficient and low-paying government jobs or expanding the private sector, it has instead increasingly cracked down on small businesses and tightened state control to root out capitalist behavior. Moreover, Kim has repeatedly refused to dismantle his nuclear program in return for easing sanctions that would allow his local industries to tap into global supplies for machinery and crucial materials. This likely means a labor-intensive economy will be the norm for a while, and with few younger people entering the workforce year after year, the country would struggle to maintain its already limited industrial and agricultural output. According to the forecast, agriculture, being the most critical sector in North Korea, would perhaps bear the biggest brunt. A labor shortage, in all likeliness, would worsen food insecurity and create a vicious cycle, where malnutrition and starvation would further reduce the population. But there are other implications of a falling birth rate, too, that should concern the country. A declining birth rate, coupled with an aging population, increases the dependency ratio, meaning fewer working-age individuals would need to support a growing elderly population. Now, with North Korea's economic model not equipped to handle an increasing number of dependents, and with limited resources, the state would face difficulties providing for its elderly citizens. Another implication that worries geopolitical analysts is perhaps to counter the effects of a population crisis, the North Korean government might further tighten its control and resort to some extreme measures. These could involve more severe crackdowns on defectors, harsher punishment for political dissent, and strict regulation on families such as forced marriages. Such measures could lead to further human rights abuses, worsening the existing humanitarian crisis in the country. These same analysts also fear that a collapse in the North Korean population could create major regional instability. Countries like South Korea, China, and Russia may face a surge in refugees, straining their resources and potentially leading to some political and security challenges. South Korea, in particular, would be concerned about the economic and social impact of a sudden influx of North Korean defectors, which could disrupt its economy and social services. A shrinking population may also limit North Korea's foreign policy. North Korea presently makes up for the lack of quality in military power compared to that of South Korea by relying on quantity. At the moment, the North Korean army counts among its ranks nearly 1.3 million active soldiers, or 5% of the population, whereas South Korea boasts 500,000 active soldiers out of a population of 51 million. So with the eventual population decline, the country may face some serious challenges in its ability to maintain the size, quality, and effectiveness of its military. Now, recently, we crossed 1 million subscribers. Ever since then, we've been flooded with emails asking us questions and advice about growing a channel on YouTube. Even though we try our best to reply to every single email, sometimes these take up too much time or they ask the same questions we've answered before. That's why we've decided to put all of our YouTube advice into one email bootcamp for completely free. So if you're someone interested in starting your own YouTube channel, you can get your email bootcamp by clicking on the link in the description or scanning the QR code on the screen. Okay, now back to the video. Well, we can go on and on about what would happen if the North Korean population collapses, but the biggest threat in the eyes of Kim Jong-un, without a shadow of a doubt, is the concern of losing stability of his family's regime. As history indicates, a population collapse could undermine his government's ability to maintain social control. We all know how the state relies heavily on propaganda and military power, But with a declining and increasingly impoverished population, its grip on power may weaken. Discontent among the population could rise to an unprecedented level, and the Kim family may face challenges maintaining their loyalty base, especially within the military, which is vital for regime stability. This could create a power vacuum in North Korea, leading to internal conflict and military intervention, or perhaps result in the country being absolved by South Korea under complex and potentially hostile conditions. All these are nothing but a stuff of nightmares for Kim Jong-un. That's why the leader of one of the most oppressive regimes in the world can be seen crying and imploring in front of his citizens for a major demographic change. But in all honesty, an authoritarian leader or not, Kim cannot force the people to give birth when they do not want to. There's a saying that the better the demography, the better the country will be. Currently, North Korea is busy in its quest for more and more nuclear arsenal, but there's one thing it needs to understand, and fast. Population is, and will remain, the foundation of a country's economic and military power. And without the right measures to reverse the falling birth rate, we fear that a population collapse in North Korea is nothing but inevitable.
Shedding a tear for his late father, Kim Jong-un has been hailed supreme commander of North Korea's military.
Kim Jong-un's reign of tyranny may be over soon. The current spotlight on North Korea has come because of recent reports that its supreme leader, Kim Jong-un, has sent 10,000 soldiers into Ukraine to assist his ally, Putin. The great successor of Pyongyang, who ascended to power in 2011, is now steadily declining from his throne in a heavy fall from grace. The young ruler arrived on the scene ready to keep alight his family's legacy of militarism, nationalism, and authoritarianism. But now, over a decade into his rule, his iron grip is beginning to loosen on North Korea. We know this because since 2011, there have been a reported 12 assassination attempts on his life, including an alleged biochemical attack pushed by the CIA and South Korean intelligence. Everything from economic decline, internal disloyalty, succession problems, and a weakening foreign policy has characterized his reign. And now we are watching Kim Jong-un spiral down. This little rocket man's time in office has been shrouded in controversy, and this unstoppable fall is going to be just as talk-worthy. Today, we're going to take a personal approach to understanding the North Korean dictator and journey together to answer the following questions. What was Kim Jong-un's early life like? How did he become the great successor? And what are his failures domestically and internationally? And finally, how is his poor decision-making accelerating to his downfall? Now, as you can imagine, videos like this expose the truth about certain leaders that are not very popular, and bots are under those videos, leaving negative comments that limit our reach. So, if you want to keep seeing videos like this on your suggestions page, please give our video a like, leave a comment, and share it with your friends and family. All right, let's get into this video. In an interview with Radio Free Asia, Tae Yong-ho, a high-ranking diplomat in North Korea who had defected to South Korea, stated that since Kim Jong-un came into power, the North Korean regime has become very unstable and gone in an abnormal direction over the past decade. A sure way to fall as a leader is to not have the support of your people. Even in dictatorships, public support, no matter how forced, is a hallmark of longevity. To show how much support Kim Jong-un is losing, the number of North Korean defectors to South Korea tripled in 2023. As soon as the border restrictions were eased post-COVID, it was like a mass migration took place. The majority of these people were students, women, and diplomats. Notably, even North Korea's elite class is leaving along with its Gen Z and millennials. When a survey was done among those who defected, 23% stated that they left because they had become discontent with the North Korean regime. Another 21% of the defectors stated that they had been forced to leave because of food shortages and the economic decline. The North Koreans have experienced 3 generations of misery, and unfortunately, their patience for the Kim dynasty has run out during Kim Jong-un's reign. Watching their counterparts, South Korea, thrive while the country continues to get poorer and poorer has led many North Koreans to question whether it's time to put an end to the Kim family's rule. What certainly does not help the situation are reports that the supreme leader's health is worsening, making people question if there's anyone in his camp competent enough to take over. For the first time, North Koreans believe this could be the perfect opportunity to rid themselves of Kim Jong-un's regime. Add to all this MS the reports that he has joined the war on Russia's side, the losing side, and you start to realize that the people's wishes may come sooner than expected. But before we pile on Kim Jong-un and talk about his failures, we need to talk about how he ended up in this mess. This is a young Kim Jong-un during his early life. There's a lot of secrecy covering his childhood, but we know that he was born on January 8th, 1984 to Kim Jong-il and Ko Young-hui. Kim Jong-il had many wives, but Kim Jong-un's mother was thought to be his favorite. She doted on her son, reportedly calling him the Morning Star King. There was a lot of controversy surrounding his mother because she was half Japanese. And because of that, she was largely hidden from the public. This has a lot to do with the Kim family wanting to portray the reigning family as purebred and elite. Because of her heritage, Kim Il-sung, Kim's grandmother, did not approve of her, and her marriage to Kim Jong-il was frowned upon. Before she met Kim Jong-il, Ko was a dancer for the Mansudae art troupe, which is a popular group of musicians known for propaganda performances that glorify the state and its leaders. Take a look at this clip, which shows the work that the group does. How they got together is a mystery, but they had 3 children in the 1980s, including Kim Jong-un. The debate in many documentaries and discussions about her is whether she was a beloved mistress or Kim Jong-il's third wife. Kim Jong-un had 2 other siblings, another brother named Kim Jong-chul, born in 1981, and his younger sister, Kim Yo-jong, who is the director of the Workers' Party Department of Propaganda and Agitation, who was born in 1987. His early childhood was spent hidden away from the world, and it is said that he and his siblings grew up in Switzerland. Before he left North Korea, he was never seen in public, and only a handful of Kim Jong-il's top officials were even allowed to meet him. His time in Switzerland as a child was a time of absolute luxury, which is very ironic considering the way that the average North Koreans live. Living off the North Korean people's hard-earned money, Kim's family had vast estates with horses, swimming pools, and bowling alleys. He reportedly had luxury vehicles adapted so that he could start driving them when he was just 7 years old. And there really wasn't anything that his mother didn't give him. Things like skiing in the Swiss Alps and swimming in the French Riviera were so normal to him that he probably had no idea what real life was like back home. Between 1993 and 2000, Kim Jong-un studied at many preparatory schools in Switzerland under a fake name. Many people believe that his name was Pak-un, and that he was the son of a Korean diplomat, so they left him alone. One of the known schools that he attended was the International School of Bern, which was a private English language school that cost more than $20,000 a year in tuition. During his teenage years, his classmates had an opportunity to witness his character, and many of them said that Kim was extremely competitive, especially on the basketball court. According to a former classmate at the school that he attended in Bern, he didn't like to lose, and basketball was everything to him. As soon as it hit 5 p.m. every day, Kim Jong-un would be out the door. He would head to the basketball courts that were at the high school in the nearby city of Lerbermatt, which was less than a 10-minute walk away. His basketball outfit was not surprising, very expensive. An authentic Chicago Bulls jersey with Michael Jordan's number 23, Bulls shorts, and his Air Jordan shoes. His equipment was also top of the line. A Spalding with the official mark of the NBA. During the basketball games, he would trash talk his opponents, and apparently, when he lost, he would curse loudly or bang his head on the wall. Later on in his life, we see this competitive streak leading to him to make some pretty crazy decisions. We'll be diving into this soon. Many believe that his love for basketball was fueled by his mother, who fed him the old Korean mother's tale that basketball made you taller. This must have appealed to Jong-un as a short child who secretly wore platform shoes to compensate for his height. Talk about a Napoleon complex. As crazy as it is to imagine, Jong-un was just a normal teenager who was obsessed with Hollywood movies and basketball players like Michael Jordan and Dennis Rodman. Although he was very sporty, his friends and his classmates say that he was not the sharpest tool in the toolbox. He was a second-tier student, so most of the time his teachers left him alone. And that was okay with Jong-un, who was satisfied with this academic averageness. His early life seemed to be pretty uneventful, and everybody who knew him stated then that he was fairly pleasant. In an interview with the Daily Beast, his early friend recalled this time with Kim, stating, "We had a lot of fun together. He was a good guy. Lots of kids liked him. I don't know anything about his life today. All I know is the guy I knew in school. He loved basketball. We played a lot together. I'd like to say to him, if you ever have the time, please contact me again so we can catch up." After his privileged life as a North Korean diplomat's son, the time came for Kim to take up his place in the North Korean courts. Now, Recently, we crossed 1 million subscribers. Ever since then, we have been flooded with emails asking us questions and asking for advice about how to grow a YouTube channel. And even though we try our best to reply to every single email, sometimes this can take up too much time, or, people ask the same questions that we've answered before. So that's why we've decided to put all of our YouTube advice into one email bootcamp for completely free. So if you're someone interested in starting your own YouTube channel, you can get our email bootcamp by clicking on the link in the description or scanning the QR code on the screen. Okay, let's get back to the video. At that time, Minnie had hope for change. He was coming from experiencing a liberal world in which ideas like democracy and free will were floating around. The general thought was that he would bring some of those ideals back home. Unfortunately, aside for his love for basketball, Kim Jong-un returned with nothing else from his time abroad. Between 2002 and 2007, Kim Jong-un attended Kim Il-sung University and Kim Il-sung Military University in Pyongyang. He graduated with a degree in physics from Kim Il-sung University and was commissioned as an army officer at the military school. After some time coasting by, it became clear that he was the chosen heir. Now, if you take a look at how the succession works in North Korean tradition, it does not make sense that Kim Jong-un became the successor. He had two brothers, Kim Jong-nam and Kim Jong-chul, who were both older than him. For a number of reasons, his father did not want Kim Jong-nam, who was the oldest, to be the successor. It is believed that he lacked the seriousness to run North Korea, and his time was marked with a lot of controversy. In 2001, Jong-nam was detained in Japan with a fake passport in a failed attempt to go to Tokyo Disneyland. He also had a lot of liberal ideas and even suggested reform that included North Korea opening up to the West. The second son, Kim Jong-chul's only failure was that he was too feminine, and his father felt that he could not lead because he looked like a little girl. Pretty harsh, right? One of Jong-chul's friends stated that he was the type of guy who wouldn't even harm a fly, and he could never have been the villain. Kim Jong-un was the perfect candidate, because he had something that his brothers didn't: seriousness. Even as a young child, Kim Jong-un would wear a military uniform at the age of 11. He had a Colt 45 pistol, which he always went around with. This should have been alarming for the people around him, but they thought it was cute, and now we have him in power. At his 8th birthday party, he wore a general's uniform with stars, and the real generals with real stars bowed to him and paid their respects to the boy, which was a foreshadowing of what his reality would be. According to stories by Kenji Fujimoto, Kim Jong-il's former sushi chef, it seemed like the plan had always been for Kim Jong-un to lead North Korea after his father. During Jong-un's 9th birthday banquet, Jong-il made the band play Footsteps and dedicated the song to his son. The lyrics of the song go, "Tramp, tramp, tramp, the footsteps of our General Kim, spreading the spirit of February, we the people march forward to a bright future." The song was performed at military parades and party congresses, so it was very symbolic that it was also being played at this 9-year-old's birthday party. Another thing Kim Jong-un had going for him was his physical resemblance to Kim Il-sung, his grandfather, who was the country's founder, leader, and the patriarch of the Kim family. The popularity that followed Kim Jong-un was cultic, and based on the belief that the Kims were a semi-divine dynasty who had a close affinity with the near-sacred Mount Paektu, which sits on the Korean-Chinese border. Kim Il-sung, Jong-un's grandfather, was believed to be heaven-sent, and it is said that he was born in a log cabin in Mount Paektu while his father was fighting the Japanese. He was known as the Bright Star of Mount Paektu, and soldiers spread the news of his birth by engraving it into trees across the country. While this was the official story, Soviet records indicate that Kim Il-sung was born a year earlier in Siberia. Media propaganda did a lot of work trying to paint him as this big guerrilla leader who single-handedly ended the war with Japan. The truth, unraveled, shows that he took advantage of a namesake who was renowned as a guerrilla leader. Brian Myers, an analyst of North Korea, stated that Kim Il-sung was not the big guerrilla hero, the big anti-Japanese hero he made himself out to be. In fact, he assumed the persona of a distinguished guerrilla leader with the name Kim Il-sung, and the real Kim Il-sung died in 1937. Japanese records of the interrogation of hundreds of Korean independence fighters from the 1930s show that the real Kim Il-sung, who led anti-Japanese guerrillas, was born in 1901 and was 160 centimeters tall. How he managed to get away with this lie is a mystery. Even his death was a mystical story, with reports that a Manchurian crane spotted in the city circled the statue of Kim Il-sung for hours before dropping its head and taking off towards Pyongyang. The Manchurian crane is the symbol of longevity in North Korea, and this was said to be a symbol of the fact that Il-sung was the eternal president. Currently, the eternal president lies embalmed at his former presidential palace, and his son, Kim Jong-il, is now lying in state at the Kumsusan Memorial Palace. These two leaders' birthdays have their own special place on the calendar and are celebrated as national holidays. And while we're on the subject of Kim Il-sung, let's talk about how he became the leader of North Korea. To escape Japanese rule, Kim Il-sung and and his family fled to Manchuria, where he later joined a communist youth group. This group molded a lot of his ideology and is probably responsible for what North Korea is today. When Japan was defeated after World War II, Kim Il-sung returned to the newly divided North Korea and became the premier of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. As soon as he established himself, he began to spread his philosophy and make himself the great leader that everybody loved. To tie Kim Jong-un with this story, a lot of emphasis had to be placed on his bloodline and the Kim family legacy, which is that they were the revolutionaries who fought against the Japanese. Reports also say that Kim Jong-un was born of heaven, just like his grandfather, and this fed into the narrative that he is semi-divine. Another way that the Kim family sold the story was through the nicknames that were given to these leaders. Kim Il-sung was known as the nation's eternal president, or the great leader. His son, Kim Jong-il, was known as the dear leader, great comrade, supreme commander, and father. In the beginning, Kim Jong-un was called young general, then respected general in 2011, then finally great successor after his father's death. This sort of trained the people to think of the Kim family as royalty and made succession between the three generations pretty easy. Before we turn to the consolidation of his power, let us talk a little bit about the great successor's love life. In 2009, Kim Jong-un was married to Ri Sol-ju. Ri was a singer in North Korea's elite Unhasu orchestra and a student at Kim Il-sung University, where she pursued a PhD in science. She is the daughter of a professor and obstetrician, and it is believed that her marriage was organized by her father. The first thing you will notice is that the portrayal of their marriage is different from Korean tradition, and is probably an appeal to the cyber generation. In the past, seeing any of Kim Jong-il's wives was rare, and all the pictures we have of Kim Jong-un's mother are from private occasions. Jong-un and his wife, on the other hand, attend musical performances together, and have been seen engaging with soldiers and workers. Ri Sol-ju has a more family-friendly image than the past president's wives, and does a lot of hosting, including hosting the state visit by the Chinese President Xi Jinping and his wife in 2019. She has been called a fashion icon and is known for wearing Western clothes and heels. Kim Jong-un is a lot more private about his children, but it is believed that they have 3 of them. The eldest is a son, but Kim Jong-un has been a lot more public about his daughter, Kim Ju-ae, with whom he has been seen in public. With his well-crafted media story, his rise to power was pretty swift. As a young adult, Kim Jong-un began accompanying his father on military inspections, slowly shadowing him and watching how he operated in his position. During that time, it was believed that he was either working for the ruling party, the North Korean Workers' Party, or in the Army's General Political Bureau. These 2 positions were significant because they were responsible for monitoring government officials during that time. In 2009, the whispers began about him being groomed to succeed after his father's passing. In that same year, he was made a candidate for the Supreme People's Assembly and given a powerful position as the chairman of the National Defense Commission. This body was a key structure in the government and was in charge of security and military affairs. It was first chaired by Kim Jong-un's father between 1993 and 2011, and then given to him. The position put a very young Jong-un in the driver's seat to make a lot of big decisions. This included the declaration of war, the approval of military budgets, and the appointing and dismissing of high-ranking military officials. Although this young man had never spent a day on the battlefield before, he began to be referred to as the brilliant comrade. From then on, his rise was meteoric. In June of 2009, he was named the head of the State Security Department, which is the government agency responsible for political control and counterintelligence. Kim Jong-un was also bestowed one of the highest honors to be given in North Korea, which was the rank of a 4-star general. The rank is also known as Taewon-sul, which is the equivalent of top general in European countries. In the US, Kim Jong-un would have been the general of the army, and in China, he would have been Hyun Shai. This gave him ultimate authority in the Korean People's Army and direct access to the supreme commander. If it was not already obvious that he was taking over, this is the move that solidified everything. This was also blatant favoritism, considering the fact that commanders who had many more years of experience were waiting for the title but had been passed over. This move also happened right before the meeting of the Korean Workers' Party, which was basically like Jong-un's initiation into the political cult. All of this preparation and planning came to fruition in December of 2011, when Kim Jong-il passed on. After the tragedy, Kim Jong-un was declared the country's supreme leader, which made him the head of the government and North Korea's military forces. 27 years old, Kim Jong-un was formally appointed to his position on December 30th, 2011. In 2012, he continued to pile on the titles to consolidate his position and was made the first secretary of the KWP and chairman of the Central Military Commission. Now, we all know that the first move of any smart dictator is to annihilate all competition. Right from the beginning, Kim Kim orchestrated a high-profile execution and purge. His first job was to eliminate all his father's enemies and his potential rivals. According to a think tank run by South Korea's spy agency, Kim executed or purged about 340 people during the first 5 years of his rule. One of the first family executions was the killing of his powerful uncle, Jang Song-tak. He was accused of treason and apparently had hatched a plan to overthrow Jong-un. The real reason, according to analysts, was that he had a lot of influence and posed a threat to Kim Jong-un. He also had a good relationship with China, and many speculated that Kim Jong-un was jealous of that. Kim made sure to make a public spectacle of his execution as a warning to all of his rivals. Before he was executed, he was stripped of his titles and escorted out of a public party meeting on state TV. Another important assassination was that of military chief Ri Yong-ho. Kim Jong-un thought that he would be a potential enemy down the line, and wanted to employ generals who were young and blindly loyal to him. Again, in a public display of humiliation, Ri Yong-ho was removed from the general staff of the Korean army. Later, in 2016, there were reports that he was executed by a firing squad because of his disloyalty to Kim Jong-un. Another important assassination that people believe was Jong-un's doing was the assassination of his half-brother, Kim Jong-nam. We spoke about him earlier, and it is alleged that he had been living in exile since 2003. He had fallen out with his father after he criticized his ruling style. But simply, he just did not fit into the image of what a member of the Kim dynasty was. He was liberal and favored the Western lifestyle. He loved luxury and spent a lot of time and money in casinos and hotels. If he had silently lived out his life away from Korea, Kim Jong-un would have just left him alone. However, during this time in exile, he caused a lot of trouble by writing letters about reform and democratization. When Kim Jong-un got into power, he knew that he had to do something about his brother. In 2017, when Nam was in Kuala Lumpur International Airport, this happened. 2 women ambushed him and smeared him with VX nerve agent. The assassination was carried out by, and I'm sorry, I'm probably going to pronounce these names wrong, Siti Asya from Indonesia and Duan Thi Huang from Vietnam. It's believed that they were chosen by the North Koreans to distance themselves from the assassination. The final move in Kim Jong-un's consolidation of power was awarding himself the title of Marshal of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. The decision was jointly made by the Central Committee and the Central Military Commission of the Workers' Party of Korea, the National Defense Commission of the DPRK, and the Presidium of the Supreme People's Assembly of the DPRK. This announcement was considered a little extra and saw Jong-un's full assertion of his control over the army and over the country as a whole. This move was also symbolic, because it was a post held by both his grandfather and his father. On top of that move, Kim Jong-un also appointed his close ally Hwan Yong-ful in the position of vice marshal in the army. During a military meeting in Pyongyang, Hyun was introduced as chief of the general staff of the Korean People's Army. His reshuffling of the army positions early on was seen as a generational shakeup, and he was very intentional about replacing the old cats with new blood. Commenting on the title, Chung Seong-chung, I'm sure I pronounced that wrong, of the Sejong Institute said, "This is the only title left for Kim Jong-un to decorate himself with after he assumed almost all party and army positions." He also rewrote a lot of political institutions and structures to suit his ruling style. Before Kim Jong-il passed, he handpicked a lot of the elites around Kim Jong-un to work as his guardians. As soon as Kim Jong-un became the leader, he quickly dismantled this guardianship system and replaced his father's friends with his own loyalists. Jang Sung-taek, his uncle, was a key figure in the guardianship system, and his removal changed a lot of things in the party and the military. Kim Jong-un also removed about 260 key elites from the party cabinet and military. This was his way of stepping out of his father's shadow and setting his own pace. Kim Jong-un also expanded the power of the Workers' Party of Korea to make sure that his party remained loyal to him and kept control of North Korea. Later on, in June of 2016, the Congress of the Supreme People's Assembly revised the Constitution and solidified Kim Jong-un's position. A new organization called the State Affairs Commission was set up. Of course, Kim was its head, and it replaced the NDC as North Korea's most powerful governing agency. All the moves that Kim made early on in his tenure were so that he could have a seamless time in power, eradicating everything that could come back against him and solidifying everything that could hold him up was important. And next, Kim began working on his domestic policy. There are things that Kim did differently and things that he absorbed from his father and grandfather. During his first public speech on the 15th of April 2012, to mark the 100th anniversary of the birthday of his grandfather, Kim Jong-un promised to pursue his grandfather's Juche ideology and his father's military-first policy. So the word Juche translates to independence, and at the core of the principle was the idea that, as a people, it was important to rely on one's own own strength. The philosophy borrowed a little something from Marxism, a pinch from Confucianism, and a dash from 20th century Japanese imperialism. In all realness, Juche has meant whatever the rule at the time needed it to mean. The philosophy is based on three basic elements: nature, society, and man. Under this philosophy, man transforms nature and is the master of society and his own destiny. What it meant collectively for North Korea as a country is that it must remain separate and distinct from the world. Kim Il-sung wanted to create a North Korea that was completely self-reliant and did not need any outside help. The important part of the Juche philosophy was that at the center of everything was the important guidance of a near godlike figure. The heart of Juche is the leader, and his duty is to develop the country and make sure that it remains self-reliant. Kim Il-sung's model of Juche was about making sure that the highest level of power was concentrated in the hands of the leader. This leader is known as the Seo-yong, the supreme leader, and at his command and direction, everything fell into place. Under Juche, the only person who possesses true consciousness is the Seo-yong. Don Baker, a scholar of Korean philosophy at the University of British Columbia, summarized it perfectly when he said, "Human beings don't need God. They now have the Kim family." This all sounds very cultish, if you ask me. The Seo-yong is so important to the North Korean people that, to this day, they visit statues of Kim Il-sung when they get married. Under this ideology, everybody's expected to have total loyalty. There is also a reason why the ideology is so vague and abstract. It gives whichever Kim is in power the political flexibility to use it to their benefit. The Kims even managed to use the Juche ideology to justify the economic turmoil that North Korea was in at that time. Juche is all about self-sacrifice and hard work. Therefore, it is the people's labor that determines how the nation thrives. Anytime that there was any shortfall, the media campaigns would push for increased production and longer labor hours. Under Juche, the leader is never the problem, and this ideology protected the reign of the Kims. Kim Jong-un has taken more of a creative approach to this ideology, and he has been using it to justify the regime's nuclear policy. Jong-un has referred to nuclear bombs as the treasured sword of Juche, and weapons as the Juche shells. In terms of this economic policy, we have to admit that Kim Jong-un inherited a world of trouble. The one-party dictatorship style of leadership had run the economy into the ground, and it did not help that North Korea wanted to be self-reliant and try to fix everything from within. What was most frustrating was that China and Vietnam had also begun experiencing the same economic difficulties as North Korea, but somehow their economies had surpassed North Korea's. Kim Jong-un tried to fix these problems in 2013 by developing his own ideology, known as Byungjin. The idea behind Byungjin was that building up the economy was just as important as building up the military. This was a departure from what his predecessor stood for, as they believed that Koreans needed to suffer for the nation to survive. Because his father and grandfather did not care about the economy, Kim Jong-un had to come up with things from scratch. During the 7th Party Congress, Kim set out some measures for the improvement of the country. The first thing he had to do away with was the overemphasis on internal self-reliance and open up a foreign trade. To do this, he outlined a 5-year plan that was meant to run from 2016 to 2021. Under this plan, there would be an increase in trade and exports with a focus on joint ventures with foreign sources. Internally, the state would become more active in managing enterprises and businesses. The first and most important aspect was food security. There would be an increase in agricultural development and an expansion of animal husbandry. Energy independence was the next thing, and one of the most important things to Kim Jong-un was reducing the reliance on China for fuel imports. Kim Jong-un's economy would be one of self-reliance and planning for the people. He would become a supreme organizer and have control over financial markets that he would manipulate to control prices. A lot of emphasis was also placed on the agricultural and mining industries because they made up 32.2% of the country's GDP. The plan, in all honesty, was a lot of bullet points with very little tangible how-to-dos. This meant that he was doomed from the start. The only active part of this plan was around agriculture and mining, where Kim Jong-un planned to work on expanding production and incentivizing farmers and miners. He saw some success in the beginning, but he couldn't really sustain it. An area that did flourish under Kim Jong-un was the construction sector, where many massive public projects were completed. Some of the famous ones are the Masikryong Ski Resort, water and amusement parks in Pyongyang, and the new passenger terminal at Sunan Airport. The resort was also built in line with Kim Jong-un's dream of ski tourism in North Korea. In December of 2013, the Masikryong Ski Resort opened. The most impressive part about the resort was how fast fast the building happened, with everything being completed in just 1 year. This was Kim Jong-un's dream for the resort, that it would be the location for the 2018 Winter Olympics. This project was part of a wider plan called the Wonsan Special Tourist Zone, announced in June 2014, which was meant to span over 154.4 square miles, or about 400 square kilometers. Before his death, Kim's father started doing some work in the tourism industry and signed several agreements with China to ease visa requirements for Chinese tourists. Jong-un's economic policy made tourism an important sector. And in 2013, he endorsed tourism and economic development districts and held knowledge-sharing conferences to discuss ways to make it boom. Although he did not end up hosting the 2018 Winter Olympics, the ski resort has massive popularity domestically and internationally. But the policy you guys probably know Kim Jong-un for best is his nuclear policy. The memes all over social media portray Kim as a fat little boy playing with his nuclear toys. The Kims before him had always been big on the military and nuclear modernization, but Jong-un took it to the next level. As we said earlier, Kim Jong-un wanted to build a policy that valued economic growth just as much as it did military development. The military-first policy, which was a big part of Kim Jong-il's reign, increased the role of the Korean People's Army in everything. The army began to participate even more in social and economic decision-making, from large-scale infrastructure development to providing its own food. It also had first priority when it came to funding and food. Maintaining a strong military presence in everything was how Kim Jong-il protected his regime and deterred any threats. Because of how important his military was to him, Kim Jong-il was willing to starve his people to spend extravagantly on defense. The difference between Kim Jong-il's policy and Jong-un's is that Jong-un tried to balance out the power a little more and focus on nuclear development. North Korea has always been obsessed with nukes, and in the 1960s, it sent its scientists into the Soviet Union to accumulate technology and experience. In the 1980s, North Korea started its nuclear program. The industry had 3,000 professionals and 200 top-class specialists who worked hard to develop these nukes. Making North Korea a formidable nuclear power is Jong-un's dream. On the domestic front, Kim believes that a successful nuclear program would create a favorable environment for regime survival. I mean, who wouldn't want to live in a country with the power to blow up the whole world? Kim Jong-un was thinking beyond his reign and wished to give his heirs something that would make sure the Kim family survived. On the foreign front, nuclear weapons are meant to keep foreign enemies at bay. In some ways, Jong-un believes that nuclear weapons will guarantee peace, economic prosperity, and happiness. On the 4th of October, 2014, the Foreign Ministry spokesman released a statement saying the DPRK was compelled to make a bold decision to have access to nuclear weapons due to the U.S. hostile policy towards the DRPK, nuclear threat, and strategy for stifling it for more than half a century. Basically, the messaging in North Korea was that the nuclear weapons program is necessary because of legitimate threats from the outside. During the 5th session of the 12th SPA held on April 13, 2012, the Constitution was revised to add a reference to North Korea as a nuclear state in the preamble. During this time, Kim had staged a very high number of weapons tests, and 4 of North Korea's 6 nuclear test explosions and all of its 3 intercontinental ballistic missile tests happened during his rule. Kim Jong-un's ultimate goal is to build the world's most powerful nuclear arsenal. This is where that competitive streak we were talking about earlier comes in. Only now it's not basketball, but global warfare. He's been looking to build an arsenal that rivals Russia and the US, and his focus is on having a diverse range of nuclear weapons. Jong-un wants to have everything from atomic bombs, hydrogen bombs, to even neutron bombs. The second classification of his nukes is also meant to be based on what type of strategic weapons he wants to use. Strategic nuclear weapons are the big guns with delivery systems designed to strike the opponent's large cities, while tactical nuclear weapons are made of a nuclear bomb and delivery system designed for striking the enemy forces and firepower, tanks, battleships, and command posts. Finally, battlefield nuclear weapons refers to the nuclear weapons fired with medium-range delivery systems to strike any target on the tactical battlefront. In 2013, Kim Jong-un held North Korea's 3rd nuclear test. The detonation happened underground, about 236.3 miles, about 300 kilometers, from the northeast of Pyongyang. The explosion was bigger than its 2009 test, measuring between magnitude 4.9 and 5.2, which corresponds to a weapon with an estimated explosive yield of 6 or 7 kilotons. tests. Then, in 2014 and 2015, Jong-un began to develop a special type of missile. The three missiles were the Hwasong-5, Hwasong-6, and Rodong. The Hwasong-5 was the first ballistic missile to reach production status within the DPRK. It was mostly an older design that had smaller modern components added to it. Hwasong-5 production was eventually phased out in favor of the Hwasong-6, and it became the first design and production milestone of the DPRK's reorganized ballistic missile program. 2016 was a scary year for the international community because Kim Jong-un launched North Korea's fourth and fifth nuclear tests in the same year. The fourth test was quite low-key, and North Korea claimed to have conducted it underground. On state TV, Kim said the explosion came from a miniaturized hydrogen bomb and claimed it was a success. It was estimated that the explosive yield was between 4 and 6 kilotons, but observers can't really tell if it happened. The undeniable nuclear test of 2016 was definitely the fifth one. The seismic activity generated registered 5.3 in magnitude, accompanying an explosion of about 10 kilotons. This is about the same as the bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This really alarmed the West, and the Obama administration worked to tighten sanctions on North Korea and declared that it would never recognize North Korea as a nuclear state. Unfortunately, no amount of sanctions or pushback could stop Kim Jong-un, and 2017 was an important year because it was the first time he tested out an intercontinental ballistic missile. What made this plan even scarier was the fact that he called his missile a package of gifts for U.S. Independence Day. On the 29th of November 2017, North Korea announced the successful test of a new ICBM, the Hwasong-15, which was apparently tested in an overnight launch. The reports claimed it reached an altitude of 2,830 miles, that's about 4,475 kilometers, and flew 590 miles, or about 950 kilometers. What terrified everybody was that its trajectory would have a range of at least 8,077 miles, about 13,000 kilometers, which means could hit the US. The Hwasong-15 is larger than the second stage of the Hwasong-14, indicating a larger engine. After the test, Kim Jong-un was satisfied and stated that he had finally realized the great historic cause of completing the state nuclear force. We're going to talk about his nuclear policy more when we discuss his foreign relations later, but for now, we need to see how his badly implemented internal policies are the reason that his reign is coming to an end quite soon. We will start at the heart of any nation, which is the economy. Earlier, we spoke about how the most frustrating part for most North Korean people is watching China and Vietnam flourish. The North Korean people have witnessed 3 generations of the same family, and they are realizing that they are not experiencing growth. It has been all about the Suryong at the expense of the people. Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il wasted a lot of time and money on projects like the Juche Idea Tower, the Triumphal Arch, and the Kim Il-sung Stadium in Pyongyang to push their agendas forward. These kinds of policies are the primary reason for the continuing slump in the North Korean economy. Right now, North Korea is among the world's poorest nations with widespread malnutrition. According to UN investigators, if North Korea does not fix its economic situation, there is a great risk of starvation. According to a report by Statistics Korea in 2023, North Korea's food production, including rice and barley, decreased by 4%, and its food shipments from China also dropped from 500,000 tons of rice in 2021 to 130,383 tons in 2022. The problem here is no longer just a policy one. Even if Kim Jong-un came up with new policies that could be implemented, there would be no energy or materials to run these factories. North Korea's economy is so heavily reliant on China's help, and that has crippled its ability to be juche. Something that is embarrassing is the fact that about 90% of fishing ships in North Korean waters are Chinese ships, and North Korea has to rely on these ships passing through for money. North Korea's own ships are of no use because the nation does not have enough oil to run them, and the fishermen cannot repair the broken down parts. This is at a time when the UN reports on global security show that more than 80% of North Koreans do not consume enough protein. Reports made between 2020 and 2022 stated that almost 12 million North Koreans, or about 45.5% of the population, are undernourished. Even Kim Jong-un has admitted that the regime has failed to guarantee its people's right to food. Do you know how bad things have to be for a supreme leader to admit defeat? Just think about that. In January of 2021, he even went as far as to admit that his 5-year economic development plan had failed during the North's first Workers' Party Congress meeting. The state rationing system has failed completely, And now trade has been happening on the black market. Although he tried really hard not to, he ended up carrying out a military-centric policy just like his patriarchs. In an economy where people cannot even eat, about 25 to 30% of the gross domestic product has been spent on defense, including the development of nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction. Then, the US sanctions that rocked Kim Jong-un as a result of his nuclear policy only dragged his country down further. Park Won-gon, a professor of North Korean studies at Seoul's Ewha Women's University, stated, "The nuclear weapons program, the economy, and the stability of the regime are all interconnected. If the nuclear issue doesn't get resolved, the economy doesn't get better, and that opens up the possibility of disquiet and confusion in North Korea's society." What has not helped the situation at all is the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic in the last few years. The pandemic has forced the government to step up to provide food, clothing, and housing for the people. All of these growing problems are fueling disloyalty to Kim Jong-un. The fact that he constantly needs to swap out leaders and politicians shows that there is distrust even in his own ranks. Furthermore, the North Korean propaganda machine is not doing what it did before. The mythical magic that was connected to the Kim name is waning, and people are really beginning to see their supreme leader as a failure. This is evident from the number of people who are going against his policies in the black market and creating free markets. The younger generation also does not have the blind faith that the older generation had, so it has become a lot harder to subdue them. This new age of North Koreans has access to media and a knowledge of the outside world. They also have something to compare their government to. Many of them are obsessed with the popular South Korean dramas that show them what their counterparts are enjoying on the other side. They also have access to the stories of defectors and have seen what human rights organizations have to say about their beloved leader. The younger generation recognizes that North Korea is economically weak and sees no reason to risk their lives or blindly follow Kim Jong-un. When things got bad, the regime's food rationing system collapsed, and the people were left to fend for themselves to survive. This means that the younger generation grew accustomed to working the markets alone. This significantly diminished their loyalty because they did not need Kim Jong-un for anything. To make the situation worse for our dear supreme leader, even fear and terror are no longer working. The North Korean secret police has jailed, tortured, and killed hundreds of thousands of North Koreans. But people are more tired and frustrated than they are afraid. In an interview with the BBC, one brave woman named Sun Hwa agreed to tell her story. She referred to Kim Jong-un as the vampire leader who kept sucking the country dry. She explained that she lives with her husband and their 3 children, and on bad days they are forced to eat 1 meal of rice mixed with maize. She also revealed that ordinary people were living off the black market trades that they have made. She works as a trader selling street food, but also smuggles electronics on the side. Kim Jong-un's vision of centering the economy in the hands of the state has clearly failed. As the magic wears off, it is very unlikely that a 4th generation of the Kim dynasty will lead North Korea. That already low probability falls lower by the day as the people's voices gain momentum. As if the discontent is not enough to topple the Kim family, Kim Jong-un's failures are cementing the death of the Kim reign. You see, he's not as organized as his father was about choosing his heir. From an early age, his father had already started to groom him and prepare the public to receive him. But where is Jong-un's heir? The reason that his succession is such a hot topic now is because of his health problems, which we're going to get into in a minute. In March of 2022, Kim's daughter, Ju-ae, first appeared with her father in the state media in front of a North Korean intercontinental ballistic missile. She's between 10 and 11 years old and is groomed as the heir of their reign. This is according to the South Korean National Intelligence Service, which has some pretty good sources. Kim Jong-un's eldest son is a young man who is too pale and thin to be the public's heir to the Kim dynasty. It seems that Jong-un has chosen to do things like his father. Remember his feminine brother? Kim's health problems are very bad. So if he were to die today, he could not give up leadership to his daughter. A rival to Kim's daughter is Kim's sister, Kim Yo-jong, who is the deputy director of the powerful Agitation and Propaganda Bureau of the KWP. Many people like her and have referred to her as the 2nd most powerful leader in North Korea. This scenario is just like the situation with his uncle, and if history is any reference, Kim Jong-un is going to try and get rid of her. She is quite powerful in her own right, so this could become a succession battle. According to South Korean intelligence assessments, Kim weighs over 308.6 pounds and is a heavy drinker and smoker. People close to him say that his preference are expensive champagnes, imported cheeses, Russian vodka, and cigarettes. He has diabetes, heart conditions, and severe insomnia. Still, short of a sudden cardiac arrest, Kim's personal health is well guarded. This is all alarming considering the fact that his father and grandfather died of heart disease. Things seem to be looking up for him when he lost weight in 2021, but recent pictures show that he has just gained it all back. Naturally, this has given rise to certain health challenges, and sources have reported that his aides have been trying to get new medications for his high blood pressure and diabetes. Things have gotten so bad that he sometimes disappears completely from the public eye in order to receive medical solutions. Even during certain public appearances, the situation has become obvious, and even his subjects can tell that his health is failing. Bong Yong-sik, I'm sure I'm pronouncing that wrong, a research fellow at Yonsei University Institute for North Korean Studies, reported he showed a problem with the breathing when he was walking to greet South Korean's President Moon Jae-in in their first meeting in 2018. How crazy is it to think that of all the problems in Kim Jong-un's life, his own health could be his greatest enemy? If he's unable to get this part of his life under control, the cause of his fall could be his death. If you think that Kim Jong-un handled his internal matters badly, wait until we get through the mess that is his foreign policy. The Juche policy that Kim Jong-un fought to uphold has alienated North Korea and made it a political pariah. His aggression and his forceful nuclear policy have led to sanctions and problems that go right back to the failed economic conditions we just discussed earlier. We will start off by describing how poorly he has been handling his relations with South Korea. Let us take a quick history lesson to understand how the two sides came to be. In 1910, the Korean peninsula belonged to Japan, and it took over and completely ended the Joseon dynasty. Post-World War II came the Great Humbling of Japan, and its territory was taken away from it. The winners decided to divide the spoils into two parts. South Korea went to the US, and North Korea went to the Russians. From there, the two sides had the opportunity to establish separate governments. Both sides tried to fight it out, but after some time, they seemingly agreed to lead separate governments. North Korea has never been happy about the separation, and has viewed the division as the meddling of foreign powers in their politics. North Korea is also not a big fan of the fact that the US is forever meddling in South Korea's affairs, and it, therefore, has worked hard to try and end South Korea. The dream for North Korea has always been reunification, but talks about that have failed dismally. In January of this year, Kim Jong-un boldly declared that there would no longer be talks about reconciliation with South Korea. Kim Jong-un has based his decision on the fact that South Korea has been in bed with the US. Kim Jong-un has seen the increase in joint military exercises between the two as a threat, and their cooperation with Japan as treason. With everything that the South has done, Kim feels that reconciliation is impossible. Because of this, he wants it to be embedded into the Constitution that South Korea is a primary foe and invariable principal enemy. This new amendment will also make it clear that North Korea would pursue occupying, subjugating, and reclaiming South Korea as part of the North's territory if another war erupts on the Korean peninsula. It doesn't take a genius to see that this decision was unwise, and will undoubtedly undo decades of work towards diplomacy for North Korea. Kim also wants to remove all memories of cooperation between the two countries, and wants the talk of reconciliation and reunification to cease. Many people believe that the tensions have been the highest they have ever been, but the truth of the matter is that North Korea does not have the ability to take on South Korea right now. I mean, do we need to explain why war with South Korea would be a bad idea for Kim Jong-un? Well, for starters, South Korea is doing 10 times better than the North on all fronts. South Korea has pursued a policy that allows it to grow as a developed economy with a high GDP per capita. South Korea's economy growth rate stands at 2.5%, while North Korea is a measly 1.5%. North Korea's economic defeat is that it is largely closed off from the rest of the world, and heavily depends on China. South Korea's economy has been flourishing, and it has become a global leader in the world of technology. Powerhouses like Samsung, LG, and Hyundai hail from South Korea, and it has put them on the global map. South Korea's trade volume is sitting at 1.1 trillion US dollars, while North Korea's is sitting at a very low 5.5 billion US dollars. The difference is night and day. Having an export-led, market-oriented economy has really done wonders for South Korea, and it has really shown that it pays to be nice. The great economic disparity makes Kim Jong-un look bad, but it would also make it extremely unwise for him to be fighting this war instead of fixing his own economy. On the military front, South Korea has also been making steady developments. North Korea has had such a heavy focus on its military, but that does not mean that it will do better than South Korea in battle. Although its army is smaller than North Korea's, South Korea's military is well-trained and has technological advancements that North Korea just doesn't have. Another thing that Kim needs to realize is that he is not just up against South Korea. The US military alliance that exists means that North Korea would be up against that formidable force. The combined defense power of the US and South Korea is enough to completely destroy North Korea without even breaking a sweat. Treating South Korea as a foe and not an ally will be something that Kim Jong-un lives to regret. The nuclear threat that North Korea poses is a significant challenge to South Korea's independence. And because of that, plus North Korea's history of not sticking to pacts, Seoul is not willing to make deals with the devil. This is a realization that he is yet to have, however, because he currently continues to provoke South Korea at its borders through artillery strikes, which has further soured the relationship between the two. However, the outcome of this is clear. If Kim Jong-un tries to attack South Korea, that would be a sure way to end his rule in North Korea. The global condemnation that Kim would receive and the isolation would only worsen conditions for North Korea further. Speaking of global condemnation, we spoke about Kim Jong-un's nuclear policy earlier, but now we're going to talk about the implications it has had on the international community and how it embarrassed Kim Jong-un. No one was excited about the news that Kim Jong-un was upping the development of nukes in North Korea for obvious reasons, and immediately its actions were condemned. It seemed like there was a breakthrough in 2005, and North Korea pledged to abandon all nuclear weapons and existing nuclear programs. However, that agreement was short-lived, and North Korea continued to expand its nuclear program. During the Obama administration, there were many attempts to stop Kim, but they failed too. In 2011, Kim agreed to stop its nuclear tests in exchange for food aid. Again, this agreement was short-lived and North Korea was back at it. In February of 2012, US officials met with North Korea after the death of Kim Jong-il, and Kim Jong-un agreed to suspend uranium enrichment as well as nuclear and long-range missile tests. But as you guessed it, he went back on his word yet again. In April, North Korea launched a long-range rocket which failed and crashed into the sea. At this point, everybody was fed up with North Korea, and UN security condemned its actions and piled on sanctions. The most interesting time for this back and forth between the US and North Korea was definitely during the Trump administration. Trump had ambitions of humbling the little rocket man and restoring world order. At first, it seemed like Trump was a lot more aggressive in his approach and very trigger-happy in how he dealt with Jong-un. But surprisingly, it worked. In 2017, during his first address to the United Nations, Trump threatened to totally destroy North Korea. If the righteous many do not confront the wicked few, then evil will triumph. Rocket Man is on a suicide mission. The United States has great strength and patience, but if it is forced to defend itself or its allies, we will have no choice but to totally destroy North Korea. The North Korean ambassador walked out of that meeting, and Kim Jong-un's response was just as fiery. He began to threaten South Korea and stated that North Korea would not hesitate to attack. In 2018, the approach changed completely, and Kim Jong-un invited Trump for some talks. The two leaders met in Singapore and signed a joint statement aimed at a greater cooperation towards the denuclearization of the Korean peninsula. I mean, this moment was historic, and it seemed like things were going to get better from there. In the following months, joint exercises between the South Korean and US militaries paused, and North Korea began dismantling testing and assembling facilities. Unfortunately, I have to ruin the good vibes by telling you that there was no happy ending. Only 2 months after the Singapore summit, reports came out that North Korea's nuclear program was back on track. From there, Trump maintained the sanctions, and North Korea continued conducting more rocket and ballistic missile tests. By 2020, the good vibes were over, and Kim Jong-un would not even listen to the Biden administration's plea for renegotiation. This aggressive approach to Kim Jong-un's nuclear program has done a lot of damage to North Korea. We cannot even begin to stress how bad these sanctions have been and how they have driven the economy further into the ground. Things got so bad that in 2021, Kim Jong-un was ready to talk it out with the US again. This statement was made after attempts were made to tackle the food shortages in the country. Kim Jong-un has been hit with sanctions from the UN Security Council, the US, and countries like Australia, Japan, and Canada. The Juche ideology does not work very well, does it? Disappointingly, in the middle of everything falling apart, Kim Jong-un is still fighting to hold on to his nuclear program. North Korea needs to seriously rethink how important being a nuclear power is if it can't even feed its own people. This nuclear policy has crippled North Korea, and it will inevitably end Kim Jong-un. Perhaps the worst of Kim Jong-un's foreign policy decisions is this one. The way I see it, joining Russia's side in the losing war with Ukraine is only going to drag Kim Jong-un further. It is unbelievable that even with a starving population, he has still managed to find enough resources to help out Russia. You can only imagine how this will be perceived by his people. The budding bromance between the two powers began to show when they reunited for a summit in September of last year. During their bilateral summit, the two leaders signed a comprehensive strategic partnership treaty to deepen their military ties. Reports show that Kim gifted Putin a luxury vehicle, and Putin returned the favor and gifted Kim an Urus vehicle. The main part of the agreement that we see playing out in real time is the promise that the two countries will provide assistance in the event of aggression against the other. Putin made it very clear that he was against Western deliveries of advanced, long-range weaponry, including F-16 fighters, to Ukraine. In response to this, Russia has made it clear that it would not hesitate to cooperate with the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. Throughout the war, there has been reports that North Korea has provided assistance to Russia. In March of 2024, North Korea shipped around 7,000 containers filled with munitions and other military equipment to Russia. Kim Jong-un probably saw the war as the perfect opportunity to test out its weapons while acquiring a diplomatic ally at the same time. In September of 2023, after a summit between Kim and Putin, artillery shells, missiles, and other equipment began to arrive in Russia. In return, 9,000 mysterious Russian containers, likely filled with aid, were delivered. The UN Security Council suspects that Russia could be providing North Korea with fuel, defying sanctions that tightly cap the country's imports of oil and petroleum. North Korea is also probably receiving badly needed food, economic aid, and military assistance. Both countries denied these exchanges, but the video you just saw proves that the two are definitely in cahoots. In our previous videos, we have talked about the astonishing death toll in Russia, with 1,000 soldiers dying per day. What Kim Jong-un is doing right now is simply feeding Russia's death machine. There have already been reports of deaths, and North Korean engineers in the area have unfortunately been killed. North Korea cannot afford to lose military strength right now, especially with everything that is going on against South Korea. This type of escalation threatens to drag North Korea into the war as NATO and the West increase their support for Ukraine. This means that if NATO steps in to stop Russia, North Korea could expect to also catch some smoke in the process. If Putin also turns nuclear, as he's been threatening to do, North Korea may also get caught up in the mess, as NATO will respond immediately to both Putin and his allies. It has been over a decade since the beginning of Kim Jong-un's rule, and it looks like he's on his way out. Both internally and internationally, the odds are stacked against the great successor. He has failed to fix the economic problem that he inherited from his father, and North Korea is currently poorer than it has ever been. The bad thing is that the situation is getting even worse, and everything is deteriorating even faster than expected. Kim Jong-un has borrowed some bogus policies and developed some horrible ones of his own. These have been overly focused on maintaining his power, and very little attention has been paid to fixing the important plights of his people. Then, in relation to his foreign policy, Kim Jong-un has been making bad decisions throughout. Instead of trying to fix things with South Korea, he escalated the tensions and started a fight he would not be able to end. Then, to wrap it all up, he has chosen to side with Putin in the last couple of years in what will likely be his undoing. This was a desperate attempt to fight diplomatic isolation, but he had chosen the wrong friend, and such an act will only serve to drag him down. As things get worse for Putin, he could be going down with him. It's not at all wrong to say that Kim Jong-un is facing his untimely end.
For the first time, senior U.S. officials confirmed that North Korea is sending troops to Russia.
There are now at least 10,000 DPRK forces in the Kursk Oblast.
North Korean soldiers are executing Russian soldiers and indirectly helping Ukraine win the war.
Why would North Korea do this?
The Russian army is suffering its highest casualties since it invaded Ukraine. Is Putin running out of soldiers to keep his war going?
On December 14th, Ukraine's military intelligence agency reported that during a skirmish along the front lines in the Kursk Oblast, a group of North Korean soldiers opened fire on vehicles carrying members of the Chechen Akhmat unit who were fighting for Russia. As a result of this friendly fire incident, 8 Russian soldiers lost their lives. This likely happened due to miscommunication or sheer incompetence, but either way, it's a bitter pill for the Russians to swallow. After all, they're now getting a taste of what it feels like to be betrayed by their own forces. And let's be clear, this isn't the first time Russian soldiers have died at the hands of their so-called comrades. There are even more disturbing and bizarre stories that reveal how far the bloodlust within Russian ranks has gone. In fact, just 2 days ago, on December 22nd, Russian forces were caught on video executing 5 Ukrainian prisoners of war on the front lines. A drone operator from Ukraine's 110th Separate Mechanized Brigade named after Marko Bezrukko, captured the execution on video. The footage shows Russian troops surrounding a building where Ukrainian defenders had been holding their position. With no way out, the Ukrainians decided to surrender. They came out of the building with their hands up, clearly signaling their intent to give up. They even lay down on the ground, completely defenseless. But then, in an act of pure cruelty, the Russian troops opened fire on the unarmed prisoners. Ukraine has vowed to report this war crime to the United Nations and the International Committee of the Red Cross. Officials declared that Russian war criminals who execute Ukrainian prisoners of war must face an international tribunal and receive the harshest punishment allowed by international law. But the heartbreaking thing is that this isn't even the first time something like this has happened. There are countless other stories of Russian forces committing these kinds of atrocities, targeting not just Ukrainian soldiers, but civilians too. Before we go any further, do us a favor and drop a like. It's quick, and it helps us keep bringing you updates like this. All right, now first let's focus on the North Korean soldiers and see how they've been unintentionally helping Ukraine. At $5 billion for 11,000 to 12,000 North Korean soldiers, it was no small investment for Vladimir Putin. For that kind of money, Russia was undoubtedly hoping these troops would provide at least some kind of advantage on the battlefield. Instead, they've become more of a liability than an asset. Their lack of training, language barriers, and now even instances of friendly fire have made them more of a headache for Russia than a help. Similarly, the involvement of North Korean soldiers in this war has also triggered a significant reaction from Ukraine's allies, especially the United States and NATO. Until recently, the West was cautious about escalating the conflict and had been limiting its support for defensive systems, mostly avoiding actions that might provoke Putin into desperation. For example, long-range missile systems like ATACMS and Storm Shadow missiles were provided to Ukraine under strict conditions. They could only be used to defend Ukrainian territory and not strike targets deep inside Russia. But Putin's decision to internationalize the war by bringing in foreign troops changed the West's perspective. The first major shift came from the United States. In November, the Biden administration authorized the first use of US-supplied ATACMS missiles to strike inside Russian territory. ATACMS could be equipped with unitary warheads, cluster munitions, penetration warheads, and much more, making them effective against multiple targets like enemy forces, air bases, bunkers, and logistic hubs. This decision became a turning point in the conflict because these missiles, with a range of up to 190 miles, gave Ukraine the ability to target hundreds of high-value military sites that had previously been untouchable. Seeing this, the UK and France also lifted restrictions on their Storm Shadow and Scalp EG missiles. These weapons, essentially the same in design and capability, are known for their precision and ability to penetrate fortified bunkers and underground military installations. So Ukraine wasted no time and used a couple of Storm Shadows to strike Russian command posts and ammunition depots in the Kursk region. On November 20th, Ukraine launched a devastating strike that targeted the headquarters of the 35th and 27th Separate Motor Rifle Brigades, along with the 2nd Combined Arms Army of the Russian Armed Forces. According to Ukraine's general staff, these command posts were heavily fortified, which made them the perfect targets for the British-supplied Storm Shadow missiles. But this attack had far more consequences for Russia beyond the physical destruction. You see, these command centers were playing a critical role in Russian military operations that were trying to push Ukrainian forces out of the Kursk region. Russia had gathered an enormous force of around 50,000 soldiers, including thousands of North Korean troops. The plan was to carry out large-scale attacks on multiple fronts and regain as much Russian territory as they could. They'd also use the North Korean troops along with them. Until this point, they had undergone only minimal training, but were still sent with Russian troops, so that they'd get on-the-job experience and adapt to the brutal realities of modern warfare. But then Ukraine struck. According to pro-Russian war bloggers, Ukraine used up to 12 British Storm Shadow missiles in the operation, and the results were catastrophic for Russia. The strikes reportedly wiped out 500 North Korean soldiers who were stationed near the command centers, including a high-ranking North Korean general sent to oversee the operations of the special units. This single strike was a massive blow to Russia's operation in the Kursk region. Losing such a significant number of soldiers, officers, and key figures in one coordinated attack was not just a tactical failure, but also a symbolic defeat. This devastating strike on Russia's command centers set them back for days. But despite this major blow, Russia remained determined to push forward with all 50,000 soldiers deployed in the Kursk region. They kept up their relentless waves of attacks, but without the crucial support of their now destroyed command centers, these assaults quickly descended into chaos. Poor coordination, insufficient communication, and a continued reliance on outdated tactics made it easier for Ukrainian forces to counter the attacks effectively. In the weeks that followed, the toll on Russian and North Korean troops has been overwhelming. Reports indicate that dozens of North Korean soldiers have been losing their lives every single day. On December 17th, a senior U.S. military official disclosed that North Korean fatalities alone have risen to several hundred, with thousands more injured. At the same time, Russia's overall casualty rate has stayed at equally devastating levels, with as many as 1,200 Russian troops being killed or wounded daily. This is exactly why incidents like friendly fire feel like such a punch to the gut. And honestly, this isn't surprising. Russia's doing next to nothing to properly train these soldiers, especially the North Koreans, so they can work together effectively. The language barriers, lack of modern warfare experience, and rushed deployment make situations like this almost inevitable. For example, here's another bizarre incident where a North Korean soldier ended up shooting his own comrade while trying to take down a kamikaze drone. The drone footage shows two North Koreans standing in a snowy field of dried sunflowers when a Ukrainian FPV drone suddenly flies towards them. One of the men panics and starts firing at the drone, but instead of hitting his target, the bullets go straight into the body of his comrade, who happened to be in the line of fire. This footage is from Kursk, and it really shows the panic on the soldiers' faces, highlighting just how poorly they've been trained. But you know what? It's hard to blame them entirely, because this is how Russian and North Korean soldiers are being taught to handle enemy FPV drones. They're told to dodge, run, or, in some cases, just stand still and hope that the drone doesn't notice them. It's as absurd as it sounds. And as you might guess, these techniques rarely work. Even in the rarest of cases, it would require an incredible amount of luck to come out alive without a scratch. This is due to the incredible speed at which the FPV drones operate, not to mention that Ukraine specifically builds its drones for speed, flying at rates that can reach anywhere from 50 to 100 miles per hour depending on the model and explosive payload. On top of that, these drones are incredibly precise and guided by experienced operators. Clearly, when it comes to drones, there's no luck or guesswork involved here. They are designed to hit their targets, plain and simple. On the other hand, the soldier on the ground is left relying on pure luck and split-second decisions, just hoping the drone doesn't follow the direction he's dodging. But then there's the payload. You see, these drones are often armed with DIY explosives, rigged with sharp metal objects like nails, blades, or shrapnel. So even if the drone misses its primary target and hits the ground nearby, the resulting explosion creates a wide damage radius with a high probability of causing severe injuries. Soldiers caught in the blast are often immobilized or incapacitated, making them easy targets for a follow-up strike. And Ukraine doesn't hesitate to send in another drone to finish the job if the first one doesn't succeed. But yeah, there are rare incidents where this type of training does pay off. For instance, in one video, you can see a Russian soldier baiting a drone and dodging at the very last second before walking away seemingly unscathed. He might have been the luckiest guy at that moment, but what most of you don't notice is the price of that luck. His comrade, lying next to the blast site, had lost his life to a drone strike just moments before this one. So sure, the drone dodging training work, but it's more like 1 in 100, maybe even 1 in 1,000, where someone manages to walk off unharmed. But then what about Russian FPV drones? Well, unlike the Russians and North Koreans, Ukrainian troops are trained and equipped with not just one but a variety of effective strategies to counter Russian drones. For example, their mode of transport often involves armored vehicles or modified buggies, which are not only fast and nimble, but also come equipped with multiple automatic weapons mounted on a light chassis. These vehicles are specifically designed to handle drone threats, giving Ukrainian troops a significant edge. Many of these vehicles also carry advanced signal jamming equipment that can disrupt the communication between a Russian drone operator and the drone itself. By severing that link, the drone is rendered useless, often causing it to crash or lose its target entirely. If soldiers are on foot near the front lines, they're equipped with specialized anti-drone guns. These devices use directed radio waves to overwhelm the connection between a drone and its operator. By interfering with the signal, the gun can cut the drone's video feed, forcing it to either return to its takeoff point, land immediately, or drift aimlessly until it crashes. But what if a Ukrainian soldier doesn't spot the drone in time? That's where the anti-drone backpack comes into play. This device creates a protective shield extending up to 700 meters around the soldier. Equipped with two protruding antennas, the backpack actively disrupts the connection between Russian drones and their handlers, causing the drones to fall short of their intended targets. Whether the drones are scouting or armed, this technology significantly reduces their effectiveness on the battlefield. One of the biggest reasons Ukraine has managed to bring Russia to its knees is its remarkable ability to improvise and innovate on the battlefield. Even when they lack advanced technology, Ukrainian forces find creative solutions to level the playing field. For example, some Ukrainian forces have been known to stack multiple AK-74 rifles together, rigging them to fire simultaneously at drones. This clever tactic significantly increases the chances of hitting and bringing down an enemy drone, especially in scenarios where more sophisticated counter-drone equipment isn't readily available. For Ukraine, every life matters, and that philosophy drives their relentless push to adapt and protect their soldiers. But what about the North Korean soldiers? I mean, how do they react to all of this? What goes on in their minds? Are they scared? Do they even know what drones are? Or are they just as disconnected and robotic as they're often portrayed? Most importantly, how do they behave with their Russian counterparts, and how are they treated in Russian camps? Well, up until now, we've had little to no insight into all of these questions, but that has just changed. 2 days ago, a captured Russian soldier shed some light on how things really are. According to him, the North Koreans are actually treated far better than the Russian troops. This privilege extends to everything: what they eat, how they're trained, and even the overall attention they receive. The captured soldier revealed that both North Korean and Russian troops are fed twice daily, but there's a stark difference in the meals. While the North Koreans are served eggs, chocolate, and even coffee, the Russians are left with barley porridge. It's clear that there's a deliberate effort to keep the North Koreans in better shape, likely because they're seen as an expensive investment for Putin. But there's more. The Russian soldier described the North Koreans as not right in the head. According to him, they never smile, act harshly, and seem completely devoid of humanity. He said they shoot at everything: drones, shadows, anything that moves, without stopping to check if it's Ukrainian or friendly. This behavior could explain incidents like the recent friendly fire and the drone mishap where one North Korean soldier accidentally shot his comrade. The situation is so chaotic that even the Russians are unsure whether these troops are trained or not. According to the captured Russian soldier, opinions vary widely. Some believe the North Koreans are well trained, while others think they're reckless, untrained, and completely unaware of where they even are. He also mentioned that the North Koreans actively avoid interacting with Russian troops, which makes sense given the language barrier. When they first arrived, the North Koreans were given a crash course in Russian. This training consisted of a list of around 100 basic words and military terms like fire, cover, and in position. But let's be honest, it's impossible to memorize an entirely new language in a few days, especially when you're being thrown into the chaos of war. They were handed a piece of paper with the terms, but then again, who has time to consult a cheat sheet when bullets are flying? This language gap has caused massive communication breakdowns, even during basic battlefield training. For instance, during a session on setting up landmines, the North Koreans couldn't follow the instructions because they didn't understand the Russian commands. Within minutes, what should have been a critical lesson turned into an awkward crash course in Russian. And that's just one example. This lack of communication affects everything. The North Koreans don't know how to load artillery rounds, assist in tank operations, or work in basic coordination with Russian units. Their inexperience and inability to understand their allies make them a liability rather than an asset. No matter how tough or fearless they might act, their lack of preparation makes them easy targets. After all, it only takes a few bullets to take anyone down. So because of the communication challenge and their weird mindset, the North Koreans move in tight groups of 5 to 10 soldiers. But this formation has become a death sentence. According to the captured soldier, these small groups often suffer massive casualties, especially from Ukrainian artillery and drone strikes. Entire groups are regularly wiped out. But he also revealed that despite seeing so many deaths, the North Koreans keep advancing, firing whatever weapon they're given, with no regard for strategy or survival. This unwavering, almost robotic persistence might come from their conditioning back in North Korea. They've been raised to see death for their leader as the ultimate honor. But on the battlefield, this mentality, combined with their lack of training, makes them easy prey. Clearly, Russia needed to do a far better job preparing and utilizing the North Korean soldiers. If these troops had been handed over to Ukraine instead, it's almost certain that the results would have been far more effective. The issue isn't necessarily with the soldiers themselves, but with the incompetence of Russia's military higher-ups. The North Korean soldiers desperately needed more training to work alongside Russian troops and form some level of synergy. With proper preparation, the North Korean soldiers might have made a meaningful impact in the war. But Putin, being Putin, had no patience for that. Instead of giving them the time to learn and adapt, he ordered them straight into the Kursk region, a battle they were utterly unprepared for. So far, the result has been disastrous. Hundreds of North Koreans are dead, and thousands more are injured, all for assaults that yielded little to no success. And honestly, this pattern isn't going to change. No matter how many waves of attacks Russia launches, the outcome is likely to remain the same. For example, Russia recently attempted a major push to break through Ukrainian defenses in an area stretching between Tolstai Lug, Zeleny Shilyak, and Nizhny Klin, but their efforts ended in a rout, with Russian troops forced to retreat. During this operation alone, Ukrainian forces destroyed at least 90 Russian armored vehicles and inflicted heavy casualties, killing and wounding thousands of soldiers. At the same time, several Russians were also taken as prisoners of war. So far, despite throwing everything they have at this operation, Russia has only managed to recapture about 40% of the territory Ukraine seized in Kursk. That still leaves significant ground under Ukrainian control, with the remaining 309 square miles heavily fortified. Ukraine has transformed this territory into a defensive nightmare for Russia, laying extensive minefields, installing anti-tank dragon teeth, and integrating defensive structures seamlessly into the terrain. These fortifications force Russian units into narrow, predetermined paths, which are then targeted by javelin missiles, artillery strikes, and FPV drones. According to Kriegsforscher, a Ukrainian Marine Corps drone operator, at least 90 wrecked and abandoned Russian armored vehicles were observed in just his operational area. Ine, a spokesman for Ukraine's 36th Separate Marine Brigade, confirmed that due to these heavy losses, Russian forces are struggling to even maintain their positions in the Kursk region, let alone advance. You see, when Ukraine invaded the Kursk region, it received a mixed reaction from everyone. Some criticized the move, arguing it created manpower shortages that allowed Russia to advance elsewhere, particularly in the Donbass. According to Emil Castahelmi, a military analyst with Finland's Blackbird Group, noted that from September to November alone, Russia seized over 600 square miles of Ukrainian territory in Donetsk Oblast. For reference, that's twice the size of New York City. This highlights the give-and-take nature of the ongoing conflict. Ukraine's objective in Kursk has been very clear. They wanted to control as much Russian territory as they can so that it could be used as a leverage during future peace talks. Or it could also serve as a bargaining chip, something the Kremlin desperately wants to avoid. At its peak, Ukraine controlled 531 square miles in Kursk, but that number has now dropped to 309 miles. Nevertheless, Ukraine is intent on solidifying its position, fortifying its defenses to make every inch of the remaining territory an insurmountable challenge. Meanwhile, Russia has capitalized on Ukraine's stretched resources and is making gains elsewhere. Russian forces are now closing in on Pakrovsk from the east and south. After capturing the nearby village of Shevchenko, Russian troops are less than 2.5 miles from Pakrovsk, a critical logistics hub on the western edge of Donetsk Oblast. You see, Pakrovsk holds significant strategic importance in terms of geography and infrastructure. It sits on a vital transportation network that connects Donetsk Oblast to Dnipropetrovsk Oblast and beyond. Losing control of Pakrovsk would not only disrupt Ukraine's supply and reinforcement lines, but also open a direct path for Russian forces to advance deeper into Ukrainian-held territory. Dnipropetrovsk Oblast is home to over 1 million people, and the regional capital, Dnipro, is also critical to Ukraine's southeastern operations. Dnipro serves as a command center, logistics hub, and supply base for Ukrainian forces in the south and east. Its industrial capacity and position along the Dnipro River make it vital for both defense and economic stability. If Pakrovsk falls, the door to Dnipropetrovsk swings wide open, putting not only Dnipro but also the broader southeastern front at serious risk. Stanislav Bunyatov, a platoon commander in Ukraine's 24th Separate Assault Battalion Adar, warned that Dnipropetrovsk Oblast lacks the dense village networks of Donetsk Oblast and defensive positions to slow down Russian advances, meaning if Pakrovsk falls, Russian forces could advance through the region much faster. The region's open terrain and sparse infrastructure would allow Russian forces to move quickly, potentially overwhelming Ukrainian defenses before they could regroup. Ukraine is acutely aware of what's at stake. This is why Ukrainian forces are putting up fierce resistance, desperately trying to recover lost positions near Pakrovsk and reinforce their defenses. If Pakrovsk falls, it could have far-reaching consequences beyond the battlefield. The capture of Dnipropetrovsk Oblast would grant Russia a significant propaganda victory, bolstering its claims over annexed territories. Moreover, it would weaken Ukraine's leverage in future peace negotiations, as control of key territories often dictates terms at the negotiating table. This is why both sides are pouring enormous resources into these battles, hoping for decisive results. Each is trying to control the other's land, with the aim of using it as leverage in future peace negotiations. Vladimir Putin is losing it right now because Ukraine has finally secured indisputable proof that North Korean fighters are actively fighting alongside Russian forces in the Kursk region.
Чи знаєте ви, де ви зараз?
지금 여기가 어딘지 알아?
Не знаю. Ви перебуваєте в Україні.
넌 지금 우크라이나에 있어, 우크라이나.
Ви знали, що ви воюєте проти України?
우크라이나 상대로 싸우는 거 알고 있었지. 몰랐어?
Не знав.
For months, there have been rumors and allegations, supported by drone footage and evidence of dead North Korean soldiers on the battlefield. Still, both Russia and North Korea have repeatedly denied these claims, but last Saturday, January 11th, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky took to X and announced that they had captured 2 North Korean military personnel. Though wounded, the captured soldiers have been safely transported to Kyiv, where they are currently being interrogated by the security service of Ukraine. This marks a significant turning point, as these captives are the first living and breathing proof of North Korea's direct involvement in Putin's brutal war. What's even more remarkable is what the Ukrainians have uncovered from this capture, a ton of shocking information that sheds new light on how the North Koreans are being used in this war. the conditions they endure, and the betrayal they experience from their so-called allies. This evidence could change the way we see North Korea's role in the conflict and reveal the deeper complexities of Russia's desperation. Now, this isn't the first time Ukrainian forces have captured North Korean soldiers alive. Back in December, South Korea's intelligence agency reported that Ukraine had taken an injured North Korean soldier prisoner. He was believed to be the first North Korean prisoner of war since Pyongyang deployed forces to support Russia in the war. Unfortunately, the soldier sustained serious injuries and eventually died before providing any meaningful information to Ukraine's security service. A photo allegedly showing the soldier later began circulating on Telegram, further fueling speculation about North Korea's direct involvement in the conflict. But that incident marked a turning point. It became clear that capturing North Korean soldiers alive could yield invaluable intelligence about their operations, training, and overall involvement in the war. This realization drove Ukrainian military forces to adapt and expand their strategies to specifically target North Korean troops. You see, by October last year, Ukraine took some limited steps by incorporating the Korean language into its widely recognized I Want to Live project. For those unfamiliar, the I Want to Live project is a psychological operation launched by Ukraine in September 2022. Its primary aim is to persuade Russian soldiers to surrender by offering them a safe pathway to defect. The initiative operates through multiple channels, including a round-the-clock hotline, Telegram chatbots, and direct appeals through social media platforms. According to its official website, the project has already facilitated the surrender of more than 350 Russian troops. Hoping that it would work for North Koreans as well, the Ukrainian Military Intelligence Agency began releasing Korean-language video messages on platforms like YouTube and X. They also posted Korean-language text messages on Telegram, directly appealing to North Korean soldiers. The messages urged North Korean soldiers to surrender, arguing that they do not have to meaninglessly die on the land of another country. It also offered to provide food, shelter, and medical services for those who laid down their weapons. But before we dive into more details, do us a favor and drop a like on this video. It helps us reach more people like you and ensures that factual, unbiased information can stand up to the flood of Russian propaganda that fills the internet. This inclusion of North Korean soldiers added a new layer of complexity, because unlike their Russian counterparts, North Koreans are completely unfamiliar with modern communication tools and don't know their way around the internet. I'd be surprised if most of them even knew what the internet is. So clearly this language and technological barrier posed a significant challenge to reaching them. Recognizing this, Ukraine decided to tailor its approach specifically for North Koreans. This time, they decided to distribute physical leaflets in Korean. These were dropped across several areas on the front lines where North Korean troops were stationed. The leaflets contained straightforward instructions on how to surrender and emphasized the benefits of doing so. One line that stood out in particular was, "Surrender today and join South Korea tomorrow." This was a direct appeal to the dreams and cultural identity of these soldiers, because they know the sharp divide between their repressive regime and the freedoms and opportunities available in South Korea. For many, the idea of defecting to South Korea wasn't just an escape, it was a chance at a completely new life. But so far, we don't have a clear picture of how effective this leaflet campaign has been. But let's hope it manages to save more innocent North Koreans from being tossed into the meat grinder. And the reason I say innocent soldiers is a bit complicated. So I'll state my reasons, and it's up to you to decide if they are or if they aren't. So make sure to comment below. You see, as I mentioned earlier, the two captured North Korean soldiers are currently recovering from their injuries, which include multiple wounds to the jaw, a fractured leg, and a bandaged right hand. Despite these injuries, their conditions are not life-threatening. Both soldiers have been identified. One is a 20-year-old rifleman, and the other is a 26-year-old sniper. Before they got involved in this war, they belonged to the Reconnaissance General Bureau, the North Korean military's intelligence arm. Now, as you might expect, communication with these soldiers has been a challenge. Neither of them speaks Ukrainian, English, or Russian. To bridge this gap, Ukrainian authorities are working closely with interpreters fluent in Korean, provided in cooperation with South Korea's National Intelligence Service. During their initial interrogation, the North Korean soldiers revealed some shocking truths. One of the soldiers stated that they had no idea that they were signing up for war. He believed he was participating in a military exercise and only realized the truth after arriving in Russia.
Що вам казали ваші командири, коли відправляли на війну?
그러면 여기 지휘관들 모자는 뭐라고 그랬어? 누구랑 싸운다고 했어?
훈련을 실전처럼 해본다고 했어요.
Йому казали, що просто тренування.
This changes everything. Up until now, the assumption was that North Korean troops in Russia were there under Kim Jong-un's direct orders, trained to obey without question and ready to fight with unwavering loyalty. That's the narrative that made sense, right? After all, North Koreans are raised to see their leader as almost a god. They're taught to sacrifice anything for the regime, so of course they'd follow orders to fight in a foreign war. To put this into perspective, consider the story of Ryu Seong-hyun. Ryu used to be one of the countless North Korean soldiers living under Kim Jong-un's brutal and oppressive regime. He spent years serving under Kim's ideologies before he finally made a daring escape across the heavily fortified Korean demilitarized zone in 2019. Ryu shared that back then, life as a soldier was much more than traditional military duties. Much of his time was spent laboring at construction sites, and when he was not working construction, he'd stand guard outdoors in shivering conditions. When it came to food, all he ever had was mushy rice mixed with corn. Meat was an extraordinary luxury, something he described as a rare treat that felt like a holiday gift. Looking back, Ryu admitted that if he had been ordered to fight alongside the Russians, he would have agreed instantly. According to his logic, he hoped to get better meals than he was already having. And just like that, Ryu would have wound up in Ukraine. But now, thanks to these captured soldiers, we know that's not the whole story. It could very well be the case that all 11,000 soldiers were tricked and sent to Russia under the pretext of military training, only to find themselves thrown into the meat grinder. The captured soldiers confirmed that they arrived in Russia in November of last year. After their arrival, they underwent a mere week of military training under Russian military authorities. Then, they were sent straight to the front lines, equipped with outdated weapons and gear. Worse, they were given no clear understanding of their mission or the stakes of the conflict.
북한의 가족들이 없어? 있어?
Родина є. Вони знають, де ви зараз?
부모님은 지금 너 어디 있는지 알아?
А як довго він на лінії фронту?
그러면 전선에는 1월 3일부터만 있었던 거야? 1월 3일부터 있었고 그러고 언제까지? 잡혔을 때까지?
1월 3일 날 나가서 옆에 동료들이 죽는 것을 보고 거기 한강공원에 숨어 있다가 5일 날 부상당하고 그다음에
3 числа був наступ. Бачив, що його солдати вмирають. Сховався у бліндажі. 5 числа його знайшли. Така історія.
To make things even more heartbreaking, here's a different incident that truly highlights the human cost of this war, especially for the North Korean soldiers. So when Ukrainian forces search for fallen enemies, it's typically to recover weapons, ammunition, identification, or tactical information. But this time, while examining the body of a North Korean soldier killed in Russia's Kursk region, they found something profoundly different, a crumpled, handwritten note in Korean. The note, dated December 9th, appeared to be personal and was likely either a draft or an undelivered message. It read, "Dear Song Ji-myung, my closest comrade in arms, I am celebrating your birthday here on Russian land, far away from our beloved Chosun or homeland, and without the embrace of your affectionate father and mother. I sincerely wish you good health and a happy birthday." This short letter, written in the midst of chaos and violence, offers a rare glimpse into the lives of these soldiers. It's a powerful reminder that even in war, the individuals on both sides are human beings with emotions, bonds, and a longing for home. Imagine yourself in their shoes for just a moment. You're young, clueless, enrolled in the military, but still working in a random construction site in North Korea. Then one day, everything changes. You're handed a rifle, given a few rushed orders, and shipped off to a war you didn't sign up for. A war that isn't about protecting your home, your family, or your future. A war where you're a pawn in someone else's game. First, they're lied to by their own supreme leader, Kim Jong-un, and then they arrive in Russia where the front lines conditions are horrifying. These soldiers barely know where they are. They don't speak Russian. Their training is less than a week. Their weapons are old and outdated. And lastly, they are ordered to move forward and not stop until they die. Here's one more thing. These North Koreans are stuck in a no-win scenario. If they advance toward Ukrainian forces, they're cut down by precision strikes, drones, or artillery. If they hesitate or try to retreat, their own supposed allies, the Russians, turn on them. Reports of Russian forces executing deserters or even killing their own with suicide drones are far too common. This is where you realize that these North Koreans are victims who've been deceived by a system that sees them as nothing more than cannon fodder. They're sent into this nightmare unprepared, unequipped, and uninformed, fighting for people who don't care if they live or die. The captured soldier also revealed that within hours of deployment, he had already witnessed several of his friends and comrades die on the battlefield. This statement confirmed what Ukrainian intelligence had already suspected. North Korean troops fighting alongside Russia have suffered significant losses in combat. In fact, South Korean lawmakers recently cited information from Seoul's spy agency and revealed that so far, approximately 300 North Korean soldiers have been killed and another 2,700 severely injured. These are staggering losses, especially when you consider that it's only been a few weeks since these troops were deployed. If this pace continues, the remaining 75% of North Korean forces are likely to meet the same grim fate. While South Korean intelligence provides one set of numbers, other sources paint an even bleaker picture. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has claimed that North Korean casualties, including both wounded and killed, have reached 4,000. Meanwhile, John F. Kirby, the White House National Security Council spokesman, quoted a lower death toll but still confirmed that over 1,000 North Koreans had been killed or injured in December alone. These numbers might vary, but they all point to one undeniable fact. The North Korean troops in Russia are being decimated at an unsustainable rate. But then it begs the question, why aren't we seeing more North Korean prisoners being captured, especially since thousands of them are reportedly fighting for Moscow? Let me warn you that the answer to this is a bit tragic. According to John Kirby, the White House National Security spokesman, many North Korean soldiers are choosing to take their own lives rather than surrender to Ukrainian forces. This is likely rooted in the fear of what would happen to their families back home if they were captured. You see, it's no secret that North Korea's dictatorship under Kim Jong-un is notorious for its cruelty and control. Under Kim's brutal regime, the concept of collective punishment is deeply ingrained. So if a soldier is captured or defected, their entire family, possibly even extending to 3 generations, could be sent to labor camps or executed. The regime also uses a guilt by association policy, punishing families for the perceived failings of one member. Soldiers are conditioned from a young age to believe that loyalty to the regime is more important than their own lives or those of their loved ones. So they must be very, very careful in every action they take. This fear of reprisal ensures that North Korean soldiers are trapped in a horrifying cycle. They can neither fight effectively nor retreat without dire consequences. But it's not just fear that's killing these soldiers, it's also their lack of preparation. Several reports indicate that North Korean troops are poorly trained, ill-equipped, and entirely unfamiliar with modern warfare. Many of them have never encountered a combat drone before, let alone been trained to counter one. Their training has been rushed and inadequate. When it comes to communication, they're reportedly given a crash course in basic Russian commands before being deployed. This language barrier has created chaos on the battlefield, leaving North Korean soldiers unable to communicate effectively with their Russian counterparts or follow crucial instructions. One Ukrainian unit even noted that the North Korean soldiers wore uniforms and gear that looked noticeably different from those of the Russians. They also reported that the North Koreans were using outdated tactics that go back nearly 70 years to the Korean War of the 1950s. Back then, wars relied on overwhelming the enemy with mass infantry charges, static trench warfare, and relentless bombardments. These tactics, rooted in brute force and sheer numbers, are completely out of place in modern warfare. It's no surprise that these methods have failed miserably against Ukraine's highly adaptive, technology-driven strategies. In the decades since the Korean War, warfare has undergone a seismic shift. Technology now dominates the battlefield. Massive troop deployments have given way to smaller, highly mobile units conducting hit-and-run attacks and precision strikes. Drones have become essential, providing real-time intelligence, spotting enemy positions, and guiding artillery with pinpoint accuracy. The concept of front lines has also changed. They're no longer fixed but constantly shifting, making large-scale assaults both difficult to execute and easy to dismantle. This evolution in warfare has left North Korean troops and even their Russian allies woefully unprepared. It's one of the main reasons Ukraine has managed to hold its ground and, in many cases, bring a supposed superpower like Russia to its knees. Moreover, a captured Russian soldier previously described the North Korean troops as not right in the head. According to him, they never smile, act harshly, and seem completely devoid of humanity. He observed that they shoot at anything that moves, drones, shadows, and even friendly forces, without pausing to assess the situation. This chaotic, reckless behavior not only undermines their effectiveness, but also puts their own allies at risk. The soldier also mentioned that the North Koreans actively avoid interacting with Russian troops, likely due to the language barrier. So due to these challenges and their weird mindset, North Koreans operate in groups. And eventually, this tight grouping became their death sentence. Ukrainian artillery and drone strikes have decimated these clusters, wiping out entire groups in a single strike. According to the captured Russian soldier, these small units often face massive casualties. Yet despite witnessing the deaths of their comrades, the surviving North Koreans continue advancing, firing whatever weapons they're handed, without any regard for strategy or their own survival. This unwavering persistence, almost robotic in nature, likely stems from the harsh conditioning they've undergone in North Korea. Added to this is the fear of what might happen to their families back home if they're seen as failing the regime. Also, it's hard not to wonder about the fate of the families of these two captured North Korean soldiers. That is, if they have any. When the interpreter asked one of the captured soldiers if he would like to return to North Korea, he paused and instead asked whether Ukrainians were good people. After the interpreter assured him that things were good in Ukraine, he expressed his desire to stay, saying he wanted to live there. However, when they asked the same question to the other captive, he was initially unresponsive. But when the interpreter asked again, using Choson, the term North Koreans use for their country, he nodded, likely due to family, or maybe he is in fear that the Ukrainians will send him back to Russia. Still, no matter the case, experts have urged Zelensky to not send them back to the north, especially the one who expressed his wish to remain in Ukraine, because it's almost a guarantee that he would be executed upon arrival. The best option for him would be South Korea. On Sunday, President Zelensky stated that Ukraine was prepared to return Kim Jong-un's soldiers to North Korea if an exchange could be arranged for Ukrainian warriors held captive in Russia. He also added that for those North Korean soldiers who do not wish to return, alternative options might be available. Specifically, those who express a willingness to promote peace by sharing the truth about this war in Korea would be given that opportunity. But how do you think the Russians responded to the issue of captured North Korean soldiers exposing their involvement in the war? You'd think Russia would at least acknowledge the fact of North Koreans being present in Russia, right? But no, instead they came up with what they must have thought was a clever solution, a fake military ID. And not just any fake ID, but one claiming the North Korean soldier was a local from the Russian Republic of Tuva. It sounds ridiculous, right? That's because it is. This particular ID was issued under the name Antonin Aranchin, a real person from Tuva, born in 1998. On paper, it included details like his supposed birthplace, Tehran and Tuva, and his civilian profession as a tailor. But here's where things start to fall apart. The ID lacked a photo, a signature, and issuance dates, some of the very basic things an ID is meant to have. And if that wasn't bad enough, journalists dug deeper and found that while there is indeed a person named Antonin Aranchin in Tuva, his real life doesn't line up with the ID. For starters, Aranchin's actual birthplace is the village of Erzin, not Tehran. As for being a tailor, there's no record of that. In fact, in recent years, Aranchin worked in forestry and later as a grocery store security guard. He was even denied loans repeatedly because of low credit worthiness. So why Tuva? Why not some other region? Well, that's where things get a bit more calculated. Tuva is one of Russia's most ethnically distinct regions, with a predominantly Asiatic population. Many Tuvans have physical features similar to North Koreans, so on the surface this might seem like a plausible cover. Putin's plan, or whoever came up with this, likely banked on the fact that people would just assume these North Korean soldiers were local Tuvans. But this plan is full of potholes. First off, language. North Koreans speak Korean, not Russian or Ukrainian. Even if you try to disguise their appearance, they can't magically start speaking Russian overnight. And while Tuvan is a Turkic language with its own distinct identity, the majority of Tuvans are at least conversational in Russian due to decades of Soviet integration. So, unless the North Korean soldiers were suddenly fluent in Russian, which they're not, the plan falls apart as soon as they open their mouths. Another issue is cultural familiarity. Tuvans may look similar to North Koreans, but their lives and experiences are worlds apart. Tuvans are part of the Russian Federation. They've grown up with some degree of access to Russian culture, albeit from a marginalized position. North Koreans, on the other hand, have spent their lives under one of the most isolated regimes on Earth. Their behaviors, mannerisms, and even military tactics are completely different. It wouldn't take long for anyone to notice something was off. And let's not forget the practicalities of war. Ukrainian forces have been able to capture North Korean soldiers and recover evidence like this fake ID. But on the battlefield, these soldiers stand out for more reasons than just their poorly executed cover stories. They use outdated tactics, like the ones we mentioned earlier. On a different note, the use of Tuva itself reveals something deeper about how Russia views its own people. Tuva and similar regions are some of the poorest and most neglected. Tuva in particular has been in Russia's shadow for decades. It only became part of the Soviet Union in 1944, and its people have faced systemic discrimination and neglect ever since. The region has some of the worst socioeconomic indicators in Russia, including high unemployment and poor infrastructure. Yet when it comes to war, Tuva's sons are sent to die on the front lines, just like everyone else from Russia's marginalized communities. Soldiers from these minority regions are often sent to the front lines disproportionately compared to those from Moscow or St. Petersburg. Ultimately, by tying North Korean soldiers to Tuva, Putin's regime is not only trying to obscure their presence, but also leaning into a deeply entrenched system of ethnic and regional exploitation. Now let's circle back to what this means for Ukraine. One thing is for sure, Zelensky is going to use this opportunity to galvanize even more support from his allies. You might have noticed that Zelensky has consistently framed this war not just as a struggle for Ukraine's sovereignty, but as a global fight between democracy and authoritarianism. By exposing the lengths to which Russia will go, enlisting soldiers from one of the most oppressive regimes on the planet and attempting to cover it up, Zelensky strengthens his argument that this war is a direct challenge to the world order. This line of reasoning has already proven effective in securing support from NATO and the EU, and it will likely be a key talking point in upcoming meetings with allies. Similarly, South Korea has also expressed serious concerns about North Korea's growing military alliance with Russia, viewing it as a significant threat to both regional and international security. First, there's the direct military cooperation. North Korean soldiers fighting alongside Russian troops in Ukraine show that Pyongyang is willing to put boots on the ground for Moscow. This could set a dangerous precedent, suggesting that North Korea might seek similar support from Russia in future conflicts, particularly in the Korean Peninsula. Second, there's the exchange of military technology. South Korea is worried that now North Korea is gaining access to advanced Russian weapons systems, such as satellite technology, long-range artillery, drones, and missile technology. For a country already armed with nuclear weapons, this kind of support could escalate tensions in the region and make North Korea an even greater threat. In response to this, South Korea has been stepping up its diplomatic and military efforts. On the diplomatic front, South Korea has been working closely with its allies, particularly the United States, to address this issue at international forums like the United Nations. South Korean officials have repeatedly called for stricter sanctions on both Russia and North Korea, and urged the global community to take these developments seriously. On the military front, we're yet to see some significant changes. This could likely include deploying advanced missile defense systems, conducting more joint military exercises with the US and Japan, and investing in next-generation technologies like drones and AI-driven defense systems. South Korea is also accelerating the development of its indigenous KF-21 Boramae fighter jets, aiming to strengthen its air superiority in case of future conflicts. For now, the fate of the 2 captured North Korean soldiers remains uncertain. Let's hope they spill out more valuable information that Ukraine could use. As for the remaining 6,000 to 7,000 North Korean soldiers still deployed in Russia, their future seems grim. With casualty rates already alarmingly high, it's only a matter of time before these troops face the same fate as the thousands who have already perished.